Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the remarkable influence of Eleanor of Aquitaine, a queen whose power shaped empires, not the fairy tale version you know, but a saga of real political prowess amidst medieval intrigue. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In a world where the average woman was as likely to be found wielding a lute as a sword, Eleanor of Aquitaine was busy rewriting the script. Born in 1122, she wasn't your run-of-the-mill medieval maiden. Eleanor was more of a medieval powerhouse, and she was just getting started. We're talking about a lady who inherited Aquitaine in 1137, which wasn't just a cute little patch of land with a few cows. No, it was one of the largest and richest provinces in France. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of the Middle Ages, but with more knights and fewer tech bros. Aquitaine was a sprawling region, covering about a third of what we now call France. It had vineyards, bustling trade routes, and enough wealth to make any medieval monarch drool into their goblet. When Eleanor's father, Duke William X, passed away on Good Friday of 1137, she became the Duchess of Aquitaine at a mere 15 years old. Can you imagine inheriting a territory that big at that age? Most of us were just trying to figure out how to parallel park. Now, here's where the plot thickens. With great power comes great marital expectations. Enter Louis Roman VII of France, a man who thought he was marrying a demure young duchess, but got something closer to a political hurricane. Their marriage was arranged in the same year Eleanor inherited Aquitaine, and it was a union that was as much about land as it was about love. Scratch that. It was all asterisk about land. Louis was a king, sure, but Eleanor was sitting on a veritable gold mine. The marriage combined Louis's nifty crown with Eleanor's extensive lands, creating a French superpower. Think of it as a medieval merger, with Eleanor as both a strategic asset and a queen. But this wasn't your average fairy tale marriage. Eleanor and Louis were about as compatible as oil and water. Louis was pious, earnest, and about as exciting as a medieval sermon. Eleanor, on the other hand, was vivacious, politically savvy, and decidedly not the type to sit in the background doing embroidery. Their honeymoon period, if you can call it that, was short-lived. The couple found themselves entangled in one of history's most ill-fated endeavors, the Second Crusade. In 1147, Louis and Eleanor set off on what can only be described as a holy road trip gone wrong. Picture this, a royal couple leading an army across Europe to the Holy Land, which sounds like the plot of a medieval action movie. But the reality was a logistical nightmare. The crusade was supposed to be a righteous military campaign to reclaim the Christian holy sites, but it quickly devolved into a disorganized fiasco. Eleanor, however, wasn't there just to look pretty on horseback. She was actively involved, leading her own contingent of Aquitanian soldiers, who, rumor has it, were dressed not unlike the legendary Amazons. Take that, Hollywood. Their journey was riddled with mishaps. In one particularly unfortunate incident, the French army took a shortcut through a treacherous mountain pass in Anatolia, which resulted in a disastrous ambush. Hundreds of soldiers perished, supplies were lost, and the crusade limped onward. Eleanor reportedly clashed with Louis on multiple occasions. No surprise, considering she had the political acumen and leadership chops that Louis so sorely lacked. Primary sources, like the chronicler Odo of Duel, suggest that Eleanor even questioned Louis's decisions, which was about as acceptable as critiquing the Pope's hat. The Second Crusade eventually sputtered to a halt without achieving its grandiose goals. By the time they returned to France in 1149, Eleanor and Louis's marriage was as fractured as the Crusader armies. They had 2 daughters, but no male heir, which, in the medieval world, was like running a kingdom with a hole in its roof. By 1152, the couple had their marriage annulled on the grounds of consanguinity, fancy talk for being too closely related. Apparently, the same bloodlines that made them a power couple also made them a genetic faux pas. Convenient, right? But Eleanor wasn't about to slink off into obscurity. Oh no, she had bigger fish to fry. Within weeks of the annulment, Eleanor married Henry Plantagenet, the future King Henry Roman II of England. Talk about a power move. This marriage was a game-changer, setting the stage for the Angevin Empire and turning Eleanor into one of the most influential queens in history. But that's a tale for another time. In the end, Eleanor of Aquitaine's early life was a whirlwind of political maneuvering, cultural influence, and a crusade that was more Monty Python than Braveheart. She was a force to be reckoned with, a duchess who wielded power in a man's world, with a strategic mind that could outmaneuver even the most savvy of kings. She wasn't just a queen, she was a legend in her own time, with a legacy that continues to fascinate us today. Eleanor of Aquitaine was just warming up. With her marriage to Louis Roman VII in the rearview mirror, she had no intention of letting a little thing like an annulment slow her down. After all, this was a woman who turned setbacks into stepping stones. And speaking of stepping stones, her next move was nothing short of a masterstroke. Within mere weeks of saying au revoir to Louis, Eleanor was sashaying down the aisle with Henry Plantagenet, the future Henry Roman II of England. If that sounds fast, it's because it was. The ink on the annulment wasn't even dry before she secured her next political alliance. Talk about the medieval version of speed dating. Henry Plantagenet wasn't just any nobleman. At the time of their marriage in 1152, he was on the cusp of becoming one of the most powerful kings in Europe. With territory sprawling from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees, Henry was assembling what would become the Angevin Empire, a realm so extensive that the sun practically never set on it. This wasn't a union of equals, but Eleanor wasn't looking for equality. She was looking for opportunity, and Henry had it in spades. Their marriage was a powerhouse pairing. Think Beyoncé and Jay-Z, but with more land disputes and fewer Grammy Awards. Eleanor brought with her the vast and wealthy Aquitaine, adding a jewel to Henry's crown that would have made even the most ambitious monarchs green with envy. Together, they controlled more territory in France than the French king himself. The Angevin Empire was born out of this strategic marital alliance, and Eleanor was right at its heart. She wasn't about to play the silent partner. She was a queen with opinions, and she wasn't afraid to voice them. Now, let's not pretend that Eleanor's role was merely ornamental. Far from it. In an age where women were generally expected to be as silent as a medieval library, Eleanor was a political powerhouse. She wielded influence over the vast territories she brought to the marriage, and had a say in the administration of both England and her native Aquitaine. She was involved in the governance of the realm, often acting as regent in Henry's absence. Picture this, a queen who not only knew the ins and outs of her kingdom, but could also run the show while the king dealt with other matters. It was unheard of at the time, but Eleanor made it look easy. But let's not sugarcoat things. Politics in the 12th century was no tea party. It was a brutal game of chess where the pieces were real people, and the stakes were often life and death. Eleanor had to navigate a political landscape that was as treacherous as the muddy roads of medieval England. She was dealing with barons who were about as loyal as a cat, and a husband whose temper was as fiery as his red hair. Yet, she managed to hold her own, using her wit and charm to keep things on an even keel. The union of Eleanor and Henry produced 8 children, a veritable brood destined to rule over Europe. Among them were future kings Richard the Lionheart and John of England. Each child was a potential pawn in the dynastic game, and Eleanor knew how to play the board. She was committed to securing their futures, even if it meant butting heads with her husband, and butt heads they did. Henry and Eleanor's marriage was as fiery as a blacksmith's forge, full of passion and political intrigue. They loved, they fought, and they schemed in equal measure. In the grand scheme of things, Eleanor's move from the French court to the English throne was a masterclass in political maneuvering. She went from being sidelined by Louis to becoming a major player in the Angevin Empire. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience and strategic thinking. Eleanor wasn't just surviving. She was thriving, shaping the course of history with every calculated decision. But while the romance of Eleanor's life is undeniable, it's important to peel back the layers and see the reality for what it was. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a brutal game of power, where alliances were as fragile as parchment and loyalty was a rare commodity. Eleanor's story is a brilliant tapestry of triumphs and tribulations, a testament to a woman who refused to be overshadowed by the men around her. She was a queen who wielded power not just through her titles, but through her sheer force of will. As the Angevin Empire expanded, Eleanor's influence only grew. She was a queen unlike any other, and her legacy was being written with every decision she made. So, as we leave Eleanor for now, poised on the brink of even greater adventures, remember this. In a world designed to keep her silent, Eleanor of Aquitaine refused to be muted. She was a queen, a duchess, a mother, and above all, a force to be reckoned with. And the story, my friends, is far from over. Stay tuned as we dive further into the complexities of Eleanor's life and the empire she helped shape. There's plenty more drama, intrigue, and power plays to come. Eleanor, poised on the brink of even greater adventures, was about to face one of her toughest tests yet. The year was 1173, and the political climate was as volatile as a medieval tavern on a Saturday night. Her sons, those little dynastic chess pieces, were growing up and getting restless. Richard, Geoffrey, and the young Henry, they weren't content being just heirlooms in the Plantagenet family vault. They wanted action, power, and a taste of the throne's sweet allure. Enter the revolt of the young kings, a family squabble that makes Thanksgiving dinner dramas look like a walk in the park. So, what's a mother to do when her sons decide they'd rather rule than wait in the wings? Eleanor, ever the strategist, threw her support behind them. You see, Eleanor's relationship with Henry Roman II was about as harmonious as a cat and dog in a confined space. By this time, Henry's infidelity was an open secret, and Eleanor wasn't exactly thrilled with playing second fiddle to his mistresses. Add to that her desire to see her sons secure their own power, and you've got a recipe for rebellion. Now, we're not talking about a couple of teenagers throwing a tantrum. This was a full-scale insurrection, with alliances that stretched across the Channel. Eleanor's son sought support from the French king, Louis Roman VII. Yep, Eleanor's ex-husband. Talk about keeping things in the family. Louis was all too happy to stir the pot, seeing a chance to weaken Henry's grip on his extensive territories. The revolt was like a medieval reality show, complete with betrayals, shifting loyalties, and a good dose of family intrigue. But let's not romanticize Eleanor's role in this drama. Supporting a rebellion against your husband wasn't just a bold move, it was treason. Eleanor was playing a high-stakes game, and she knew it. The rebellion quickly spread, with battles flaring up across Henry's domains in France and England. The young king, Henry the Younger, was crowned co-king with his father, a symbolic gesture with about as much real power as a paper crown. While Richard and Geoffrey took up arms in the Aquitaine and Brittany. The rebellion was a logistical nightmare for Henry Roman II, who was used to being the chess master, not the piece under threat. But Eleanor's involvement was about to take a dramatic turn. In 1173, she was captured while trying to join her sons in Poitiers. Henry, none too pleased with his wife's betrayal, had her imprisoned. Eleanor was shipped off to England, where she would spend the next 16 years under house arrest, a medieval version of being grounded, but with less freedom and a lot more political tension. Yet here's where Eleanor's story takes an intriguing twist. Even in captivity, she wasn't silenced. Eleanor had spent decades honing her political acumen, and she knew how to keep her influence alive even behind stone walls. Her prison was no dungeon. She was held in relative comfort, a testament to the respect and fear she commanded. From her confinement, she maintained correspondence, subtly influencing decisions through the network of contacts she had cultivated over the years. This was a woman who could play the long game, making her presence felt even when physically absent. But let's talk about the economics of rebellion for a second. War wasn't cheap. The cost of raising an army was staggering, with soldiers needing equipment, sustenance, and compensation. The financial strain on Henry's resources was immense, forcing him to levy taxes and borrow funds. This rebellion strained the royal coffers, highlighting just how financially intertwined the monarchy was with its nobles and subjects. Eleanor understood these dynamics all too well. Even while imprisoned, she remained a duchess with lands and vassals, and her economic clout was a card she could still play. Eleanor's captivity didn't make her a passive observer. Even in chains, she was a force to be reckoned with, a testament to her indomitable spirit. Over the years, the rebellion simmered down, not least because the young kings realized that rebellion was a lot easier to start than to sustain. By 1174, the revolt had effectively collapsed, and Henry, ever the shrewd politician, slowly reasserted control. Yet, Eleanor's story was far from over. Her imprisonment didn't diminish her role as queen and mother. She remained a pivotal figure, with her eyes firmly set on the future. In 1189, after Henry's death, her son, Richard the Lionheart, ascended to the throne. And guess who was there to guide him? Eleanor, released from captivity, took up the mantle of regency while Richard embarked on the Third Crusade. Her political savvy was as sharp as ever, and she was back in the game, proving that even captivity couldn't dim her influence. Eleanor of Aquitaine's involvement in the rebellion and her subsequent imprisonment is a chapter in her life that underscores her resilience and cunning. It's a tale of power, betrayal, and the enduring spirit of a woman who refused to be sidelined. Her story is a vivid tapestry of medieval politics, where family ties were as binding as chains and as fragile as a spider's web. Eleanor wasn't just a queen. She was a master of survival, a figure who navigated the treacherous waters of her time with grace, wit, and an unyielding will. And as we close this chapter, remember, Eleanor's legacy wasn't just in the title she held, but in the indelible mark she left on history, a mark that would echo through the ages. The story, my friends, isn't over yet. Stay tuned as we explore the next phase of Eleanor's life, where she'll continue to defy expectations and shape the course of history. The story of Eleanor of Aquitaine is like a medieval tapestry, filled with vibrant colors and intricate patterns that tell a tale of power, intrigue, and resilience. But this tapestry was far from complete. With Henry Roman II's death in 1189, the stage was set for Eleanor to wield her influence as Queen Mother, a role that would test her political acumen and maternal instincts in equal measure. As the Angevin Empire held its breath, Richard the Lionheart ascended to the throne. Picture this, a king who preferred the thrill of battle to the tedium of governance, more interested in crusades than court politics. Richard was the medieval equivalent of a rock star, and like any good rock star, he had a penchant for adventure that often left the kingdom in need of a steady hand. Enter Eleanor, the indomitable Queen Mother, who was anything but a background figure. While Richard gallivanted off to the Holy Land, Eleanor was left to manage the home front. This wasn't your typical case of mom babysitting while the kids were away. No, Eleanor was effectively running the kingdom, a task that involved more political juggling than a circus act. She was the linchpin holding the shaky Angevin Empire together, working tirelessly to maintain stability and ensure that Richard's reign didn't crumble like a poorly baked pie. One of her most impressive feats during this period was negotiating Richard's release from captivity. In 1192, while returning from the Third Crusade, Richard was captured by Leopold V of Austria and later handed over to Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. Talk about a travel nightmare. Eleanor sprang into action, orchestrating a diplomatic campaign that would make any modern-day spin doctor envious. The ransom demanded for Richard's release was astronomical, 150,000 marks, approximately 3 times the annual income of the English crown. That's right, Richard's freedom came with a price tag that would make even the wealthiest of kings blanch. But Eleanor was not one to be daunted by financial obstacles. She mobilized resources, rallied support, and set about raising the funds. This was no small feat in an era when communication was as slow as a snail on a leisurely stroll. Eleanor's network of contacts stretched across Europe, and she used every ounce of her influence to secure the necessary funds. Her efforts paid off, and in 1194, Richard was finally released. This was more than just a family reunion. It was a testament to Eleanor's diplomatic prowess and unyielding determination. However, the political landscape was anything but calm. Richard might have been back on English soil, but the kingdom was far from serene. Family dynamics in the Angevin Empire were as volatile as a powder keg, with tensions simmering beneath the surface. Eleanor's youngest son, John, was a constant source of concern. Known later as Lackland, due to his initial lack of territorial holdings, John was ambitious, cunning, and about as trustworthy as a fox in a henhouse. Eleanor, ever the astute politician, understood the delicate balance required to keep her son's ambitions from tearing the family apart. Richard's focus on military campaigns often left a power vacuum, one that John was all too eager to fill. Eleanor's challenge was to maintain a semblance of unity, ensuring that Richard's absence didn't lead to a full-blown sibling rivalry worthy of a soap opera. despite her best efforts. The familial conflicts were like a game of whack-a-mole. Just when one was resolved, another would pop up. Eleanor's role as Queen Mother was a constant balancing act, managing not only her son's ambitions, but also the interests of powerful barons and foreign allies. The political climate was as unpredictable as the English weather, and Eleanor had to navigate it with the precision of a master chess player. Economically, the kingdom was under strain. The cost of Richard's ransom had depleted the royal coffers, and the ongoing demands of military campaigns and governance weighed heavily on the treasury. Eleanor understood the economic realities all too well, and she worked to mitigate the impact. Her strategic mind was always at work, finding ways to maintain the kingdom's stability in the face of financial challenges. Yet, for all her efforts, Eleanor's story is not one of unbroken triumph. The challenges she faced were immense, and the solutions were often imperfect. The romanticized notion of a queen mother effortlessly guiding her sons through political storms is far from the truth. Eleanor's reality was one of constant negotiation, compromise, and resilience. She was navigating a world where power was as fleeting as a summer breeze, and where alliances could shift as quickly as the tides. As the 12th century drew to a close, Eleanor's influence remained palpable. She was a queen mother who wielded power not just through her sons, but through her own indomitable spirit. Her legacy was one of astute diplomacy, strategic foresight, and an unwavering commitment to her family and her realm. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a force of nature, a testament to the enduring power of a woman who refused to be defined by the limitations of her time. And while her story is far from over, one thing is clear. Eleanor's legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, diplomacy, and resilience. It's a tale that continues to captivate, offering a glimpse into the life of a woman who shaped the course of history with every decision she made. So, as we pause to catch our breath, remember that Eleanor's story is not just a chapter in the annals of history. It's a saga of power, intrigue, and the indomitable will of a queen who refused to be overshadowed. Stay tuned as we explore the final chapters of Eleanor's life, where the stakes are higher, the drama more intense, and the legacy more profound. As Eleanor's years advanced, she found herself retreating from the tumultuous world of political chess games and familial squabbles. Picture a queen who'd spent decades in the thick of medieval drama, now seeking a quieter rhythm of life. By the time Richard, the Lionheart, died in 1199, Eleanor was well into her 70s, a ripe old age in an era where the average life expectancy was barely half that. Her later years saw her pulling back from the political spotlight, yet her influence lingered like the scent of a fine Bordeaux. Eleanor eventually chose to retire to the Abbey of Fontevraud, a place more serene than the courts and battlefields that had been her stage. It was here, amidst the stone walls and cloisters, that she sought a measure of peace, a respite from the relentless pace of royal life. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a retreat into obscurity. Fontevraud was no ordinary abbey. It was a nexus of power and prestige, a place where Eleanor maintained her connections and influence, albeit from a more tranquil setting. Even in her retirement, she was the matriarch of a dynasty that stretched across Europe, and her counsel was still valued by her surviving children and grandchildren. As Eleanor settled into her new life, her legacy began to crystallize. Her story, already rich with intrigue and adventure, started to transform into something of a legend. The myths surrounding Eleanor of Aquitaine grew like wildflowers, vibrant and a tad unruly. Romantic tales painted her as a queen of unmatched beauty and wisdom, a medieval Helen of Troy with a sharp political mind. But let's take a closer look. Those stories often glossed over the gritty reality of her life. For instance, Eleanor's involvement in the Crusades has been romanticized as a glamorous escapade, yet in reality, it was a grueling expedition fraught with hardship and danger. The mythic image of Eleanor leading a band of warrior women in Amazonian attire, while captivating, is more the stuff of legend than fact. The truth is, she was a shrewd political operator, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval geopolitics. Her influence extended far beyond the battlefield, into the realms of diplomacy and governance. Then, there's the notion of Eleanor as a prisoner in gilded chains, a queen unjustly confined by her husband's jealous wrath. While her 16 years of captivity was certainly a hardship, they were not spent in a dungeon, as some tales would have you believe. She was held in relative comfort, her status as Duchess and Queen Mother ensuring that her imprisonment was more about political maneuvering than personal vendetta. History, as it often does, has a way of embellishing the truth, crafting a narrative that is as much about what we wish had happened as it is about what actually did. Eleanor's enduring legacy is also reflected in the cultural and artistic revival she championed, what historians often refer to as the Court of Love. This was a period marked by a flourishing of courtly culture and the arts, with Eleanor as a pivotal figure in promoting the ideals of chivalry and courtly love. She was a patron of the troubadours, those medieval singer-songwriters who would be right at home in today's indie scene. These artists sang of love and valor, painting a world where knights were gallant and ladies were fair. It was a romantic vision that captured imaginations and left an indelible mark on Western literature and culture. Yet, Eleanor's real contribution was her ability to wield power deftly in a male-dominated society. She was a master of the political game, using marriage, diplomacy, and her own formidable intellect to shape the destiny of her family and her realm. Her influence on her children, particularly Richard and John, was profound, taught them the art of rulership, though how well they listened is debatable, given John's eventual reputation as one of England's most unpopular kings. As the curtain fell on Eleanor's life in 1204, at the age of 82, she left behind a legacy that was as multifaceted as a medieval tapestry. Her bones were laid to rest at Fontevraud Abbey, next to Henry Roman II and Richard the Lionheart, three figures intertwined by blood, love, and power. Her tomb is a testament to a life lived on her own terms, a testament to a woman who refused to be a mere footnote in history. Eleanor of Aquitaine's story is one that defies easy categorization. She was a queen, a mother, a rebel, and a stateswoman. Her life was a grand narrative of triumph and tribulation, of power seized and power wielded. In an age that often sought to silence women, Eleanor's voice rang out clear and strong, echoing through the halls of history. Her legacy is not just in the lands she ruled or the dynasties she shaped, but in the enduring spirit of a woman who dared to defy the constraints of her time. As we conclude our exploration of Eleanor's life, let's remember her not just as a queen of legend, but as a real woman who navigated the complexities of power with grace, intellect, and an unyielding will. Her story is a reminder that history is not just the tale of great men, but of great women who, like Eleanor, leave a mark that time cannot erase. In the year 1666, London was a city humming with activity, a bustling metropolis for its time, though metropolis might be a generous term for what was essentially a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Picture a skyline dominated by wooden buildings and thatched roofs, a scene that would make any modern fire marshal break out in a cold sweat. The streets were narrow, almost claustrophobic, as if Londoners had collectively agreed that personal space was overrated. Imagine the smell of roasting meat and the chatter of vendors as people bustled through these crowded alleyways, all tightly packed together like sardines in a wooden can. The city was home to about 350,000 people, a population density that made cozy sound like an understatement. The infrastructure was as precarious as a unicycle on a tightrope. Buildings leaned over streets in a state of perpetual embrace, their upper stories almost kissing, leaving little room for sunlight or sanity to squeeze through. With such a setup, the fire hazard was less of a risk and more of a certainty waiting to happen. Economically, the city was a thriving hub of trade and commerce, the lifeblood of the nation, if you will. But this wealth came with its own set of issues. London's wealth gap was as wide as the Thames itself, with the rich living in relative comfort, while the poor were crammed into cramped quarters, sharing walls, roofs, and occasionally fleas. It was a city of contrast, where the decadent and the decrepit lived side by side, often separated by a single, flimsy partition of wood. Enter Thomas Fariner, the baker whose Pudding Lane establishment unwittingly became ground zero for the Great Fire. Now, baking bread may seem innocent enough, but Fariner's bakery was the perfect storm of flammable materials. Flour dust hung in the air like a fine powder keg, and the ovens blazed with enough heat to roast a medieval turkey. One can only assume Fariner was better at baking than at fire safety, as the events of September 2 would soon reveal. The fire started in the early hours of the morning when most of the city was enjoying a good night's sleep, or as good as sleep gets when you're packed like sardines in a wooden box. A stray spark, or maybe a forgotten ember, ignited some of the bakery's stock, and like a gossip in a crowded room, the fire spread with alarming speed. Within hours, the flames had leapt from building to building, helped along by the same wind that Londoners normally cursed for ruining their wigs. Why did it matter that a fire started in a bakery? Well, aside from the obvious threat of mass immolation, London was a city of trade routes and merchant dreams. The infrastructure was critical to the economy, and losing even a part of it was akin to knocking out a chunk of the nation's GDP. The blaze wasn't just burning wood and thatch. It was torching livelihoods, dreams, and the fragile balance of an already strained city. The romantic notion of a quaint English city, with its cobbled streets and charming cottages, might sound lovely, but the reality was far more precarious. The city's architecture was practically inviting disaster. It was less a question of if a fire would happen than when. And when it finally did, the consequences were as catastrophic as they were predictable. As the fire danced its way through the city, consuming everything in its path, the people of London were left to wonder why anyone ever thought wood and straw made for good building materials. The wind, capricious and fierce, fanned the flames until they roared like a lion let loose in a butcher's shop. The fire wasn't just a physical reality. It was a social and economic cataclysm, laying bare the vulnerabilities of a city that had grown too quickly and too carelessly. In the days to come, as the fire raged on, it became clear that London's urban planning, or lack thereof, had turned the city into a smorgasbord for flames. The narrow streets, the wooden buildings, the thatched roofs, all of it conspired to make extinguishing the blaze a Herculean task. And as the firemen of the day, armed with little more than leather buckets and sheer determination, battled the inferno, the rest of the city could only watch and hope that their homes, their businesses, and their lives wouldn't go up in smoke. As Londoners stood helplessly watching their city go up like a bonfire on Guy Fawkes night, the fire was making quick work of the city's less-than-stellar urban planning. By the end of the first day, a brutal reality set in. This wasn't just another fire that could be doused by a few buckets of Thames water. The flames were advancing at a rate that would make a modern wildfire look sluggish. Estimates suggest that the fire was consuming an area the size of about 2 football fields every hour, a pace that turned much of London into an impromptu bonfire. Amidst this chaos, the man of the hour, or perhaps the man of indecision, stepped onto the stage. Lord Mayor Thomas Bloodworth was as decisive in a crisis as a deer in headlights. Legend has it that when first alerted to the fire, his response was a dismissive, "Pish, a woman could piss it out." Whether or not he actually said those words, one thing is clear. Bloodworth's hesitation was catastrophic. He had the authority to order the tearing down of buildings to create fire breaks, a strategy that could have slowed the fire's progress. Instead, he waffled, hemmed, and hawed as if he were weighing the pros and cons of a new hat rather than the fate of London. As Bloodworth dithered, the fire continued its relentless march, aided by winds that seemed to have their own sinister agenda. These gusts, blowing up to 30 miles per hour, were less a gentle breeze and more a bellows feeding the inferno. The flames leapt from one timber-framed house to the next, like a fiery game of hopscotch. Within 24 hours, over 300 houses were reduced to ash, and iconic structures like St. Paul's Cathedral were in peril. The situation grew so dire that even the most level-headed Londoners found themselves caught in a frenzy. Panic spread faster than the fire itself. People were desperate to save what they could, and in the absence of U-Haul trucks, some resorted to throwing their belongings into the River Thames. Imagine the Thames not as a calm, flowing river, but as a chaotic soup of furniture, personal effects, and a few bewildered fish wondering why they suddenly had new roommates. The economic implications were as devastating as the physical destruction. London was not just any city, it was the heart of England's economy. With warehouses, shops, and homes evaporating into smoke, the financial impact was as tangible as the heat radiating from the burning buildings. Thousands were left homeless overnight, an early modern example of the housing crisis. These weren't just numbers. They were livelihoods, dreams, and futures going up in flames. As the fire raged unchecked, the city's social fabric began to unravel. The rich and poor, who had once lived side by side, now faced the same threat. It didn't matter if you were a noble or a pauper. Fire was the great equalizer. However, the methods of escape varied widely depending on one's social standing. The wealthier citizens had the luxury of loading carts with their valuables and fleeing to the countryside, while the poor were left to navigate the chaos with little more than the clothes on their backs. In the midst of the pandemonium, stories of heroism and folly abounded. Some Londoners formed makeshift brigades, armed with wet blankets and buckets, their efforts valiant, but mostly futile against the sheer scale of the blaze. Others took a more opportunistic view, looting abandoned homes and shops, a grim reminder that crisis often brings out both the best and the worst in human nature. As night fell on the second day, the fire showed no signs of abating. The skyline, once dotted with the spires of churches and the roofs of homes, was now a glowing horizon of destruction. For many, it felt as if the world was ending. But even in the face of such devastation, life had to go on. Families gathered on the outskirts of the city, forming makeshift camps, their silhouettes dancing in the firelight, a haunting tableau of survival. And so, with each passing hour, the fire claimed more of the city, its roar a constant reminder of the fragility of human achievement. London, the bustling hub of trade and commerce, was brought to its knees by a combination of wind, wood, and woeful indecision. Yet even as the flames consumed the city, a glimmer of resilience began to emerge. For in the ashes, there was a seed of determination, a resolve to rebuild, to rise from the ruins, and perhaps to learn from the mistakes of the past. But for now, as the fire continued its relentless advance, the full extent of the catastrophe was still unfolding. With the fate of the city hanging in the balance, there was little to do but watch and wait as London burned. The story of the Great Fire was far from over, and the days ahead would test the mettle of a city poised on the brink of transformation. While London teetered on the brink of obliteration, a curious mix of desperation and innovation took hold. Enter the fire breaks, a method as old as fire itself, but just as controversial as a new tax. The basic idea was to create gaps in the cityscape by demolishing buildings, thus starving the fire of its fuel. In theory, it was genius. In practice, it was like trying to stop a charging bull by pulling out a few blades of grass. The problem: it required a level of decisiveness that Lord Mayor Bloodworth seemed allergic to, and time, a commodity in short supply. As the inferno continued its fiery tango through the city, King Charles Roman II decided he'd had enough of the dithering. Normally more at home in a palace than a firefight, Charles donned a practical leather jacket and took to the streets, a royal figure in an unroyal situation. Imagine the shock. The king, with soot on his face and urgency in his step, directing efforts like a general on the battlefield. This was not your run-of-the-mill royal PR stunt, but a genuine attempt to wrestle the situation under control. Charles, no stranger to the chaos of life, having survived the English Civil War, knew that extraordinary times called for extraordinary measures. So, he sanctioned the use of gunpowder to blow up buildings in a desperate effort to create fire breaks. Now, using explosives to fight fire might sound like fighting a hangover with more whiskey, but it was a strategy born of necessity. Despite the risk of collateral damage, it was one of the few options left that could turn the tide. Under the king's watchful eye, soldiers and civilians worked side by side to demolish structures. The explosions were a cacophony of desperation and hope, each one a calculated risk to save London from complete devastation. It was a scene straight out of an action movie, minus the CGI and with considerably more grime. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The city was being torn apart to save what little of it could be preserved. As the initial shock of the fire's spread gave way to a grim determination, rumors began to swirl faster than smoke. In an era before social media, word of mouth was both the lifeline and the curse of public opinion. Myths sprouted like weeds in a garden of panic, with foreign immigrants and Catholics quickly becoming the scapegoats for the disaster. It was a shameful chapter, a medieval witch hunt in the heart of a supposedly modernizing city. Xenophobia was as rampant as the fire itself. Frenchmen, Dutchmen, and anyone with a foreign accent were eyed with suspicion, accused of being arsonists or spies sent to destabilize the kingdom. Catholics, always an easy target in Protestant England, were similarly blamed, casting a shadow of fear and mistrust over the community. It was a PR nightmare, before anyone even knew what public relations were, a testament to the power of fear over rationality. The streets, already choked with smoke, now brimmed with paranoia. People were arrested on the flimsiest of evidence, sometimes nothing more than a resentful neighbor's word. In truth, the fire was as much a product of poor urban planning and bad luck as any malicious intent. But in times of crisis, reality often takes a backseat to hysteria. Amidst this cloud of suspicion, King Charles Roman II leadership shone like a beacon. His hands-on approach wasn't just about dousing flames. It was about quelling fears and restoring order. His presence on the ground reassured the populace that they weren't abandoned to the mercy of the flames or their own superstitions. By the fourth day, the fire's relentless advance began to slow, thanks in no small part to the changing winds and the fire breaks, both natural and man-made. The burned-out shell of London was a sobering sight. An estimated 200 houses, 87 parish churches, and iconic structures like St. Paul's Cathedral had succumbed to the blaze. Financial losses were staggering, with damage costs running into millions of pounds, a sum that could make even a modern billionaire gulp. What emerged from the ashes was not just a vision of ruin, but a canvas for renewal. The fire had exposed the city's vulnerabilities, and with that came an opportunity to rebuild smarter, safer, and perhaps a bit more flame-resistant. But as Londoners sifted through the debris of their lives, the question hung heavily in the smoke-filled air. Could the city rise again, and at what cost? The story of the Great Fire wasn't just about destruction. It was about resilience in the face of disaster. It was about the courage to face down an inferno, the tenacity to rebuild from nothing, and the lessons learned in the crucible of catastrophe. As the flames finally flickered out, leaving a charred but resolute London in their wake, the stage was set for a new chapter, one that would redefine the city and its people for generations to come. But for now, the embers still glowed with the promise of what could be, even as the spectre of fear lingered, a reminder of the power of myth in the molding of history. The Great Fire had ended, but its impact was far from over. The path to recovery was fraught with challenges, debates, and new beginnings. Rebuilding a city was no small feat, and the decisions made in its aftermath would echo through the annals of history. As the smoke cleared, London prepared to rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and destined to be forever transformed by the flames that had once threatened to consume it. The Great Fire of London may have flickered out, but the real test was just beginning. London's skyline was a graveyard of charred ruins and smouldering dreams, a stark reminder that even the most bustling cities can be reduced to ash by a single spark. With over 200 homes and 87 churches obliterated, including the majestic St. Paul's Cathedral, the city was a blank slate, waiting for a visionary, or perhaps a miracle. Enter Christopher Wren, a man whose name sounds suspiciously like he should be fronting a 70s rock band rather than rebuilding a city. Wren was an architect of great ambition, with dreams as lofty as the spires he planned to erect. He saw the fire's aftermath not as a tragedy, but as a canvas, an unprecedented chance to transform London from a medieval maze into a modern metropolis. But of course, there's a fine line between vision and folly, and Wren's plans teetered precariously on the edge of both. Wren proposed a radical redesign for London, complete with wide, straight boulevards and grand piazzas that wouldn't look out of place in Paris or Rome. His vision included a new St. Paul's Cathedral, not just as a place of worship, but as a symbol of rebirth, a phoenix in stone. Yet his plans were as practical as building a sandcastle in a hurricane. The logistics of rebuilding were a nightmare of epic proportions. There were disputes over land ownership, financial constraints that would make a penny pincher blush, and the ever-present tension between innovation and practicality. Rebuilding was going to cost a pretty penny. Well, more like millions of them. The total financial damage from the fire was estimated at £10 million, a sum that would make even the most generous of royal treasurers wince. The Crown and city authorities scrambled to raise funds, resorting to a mix of taxes, loans, and even lotteries. Yes, lotteries. Because when your city is in ruins, why not try your luck a game of chance? And then there were the Londoners themselves, a resilient bunch if ever there was one. The fire may have knocked them down, but it didn't knock them out. They were determined to rebuild, to reclaim their city from the ashes. But resilience doesn't pay the bills, and many were left in financial ruin, struggling to find the means to rebuild their homes and businesses. It was a classic case of easier said than done, as the city wrestled with the realities of reconstruction. The task of rebuilding London was not just an architectural challenge, but a social one. The fire had exposed the city's socio-economic fault lines, and the rebuilding process threatened to deepen them. Wealthier Londoners had the resources to rebuild quickly, often in more fire-resistant materials like brick and stone. But for the poor, who had lost everything, rebuilding was a Herculean task. Many found themselves forced to move to the outskirts, their homes replaced by grander structures that catered to the affluent. Meanwhile, Wren's ambitious plans faced resistance from all quarters. Property owners were reluctant to give up their land for the sake of wide boulevards and public squares, preferring the familiar chaos of narrow streets to the uncertainty of architectural innovation. And so, compromise became the order of the day. Wren's grand vision was pared down, his sweeping avenues narrowed, his piazzas shrunk. London was rebuilt, but not always as planned. In the end, the new St. Paul's Cathedral became a reality, a crown jewel in the heart of the city, a testament to Wren's genius and persistence. It took 36 years to complete, a timeline that would make even the most patient of builders groan, but it stood as a symbol of London's resilience and renewal. The city itself rose again, a patchwork of old and new, tradition and innovation, a living testament to the challenges and triumphs of rebuilding from nothing. Yet, amidst the rebuilding, myths and legends continued to swirl like the smoke that had once choked the city. The Great Fire was a catastrophe that captured the imagination, a story retold through the generations, each telling adding a layer of romance to the harsh realities of history. It was a narrative that spoke to the human spirit's capacity for hope and renewal, even if the truth was more complicated. As London clawed its way back to life, the lessons of the fire lingered. The city had been given a second chance, a chance to build not just with brick and stone, but with foresight and wisdom. The Great Fire had revealed the fragility of urban life, a revelation that echoed through time. Yet the city did what cities do best. It adapted, evolved, and endured. The story of the fire wasn't just about what was lost, but what was learned, and what was yet to be reclaimed. The ember of transformation had been lit, and while Wren and his contemporaries laid the foundations, the city would continue to build upon them for generations to come. The Great Fire of London was a story of devastation, yes, but also of rebirth, a testament to the enduring spirit of a city and its people. And as the new London emerged from the ashes, it stood as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that, even in the face of disaster, the human spirit can rise, phoenix-like, from the ruins. And so, the tale of the Great Fire continued, its flames now a distant memory, but its legacy burning brightly in the heart of a city reborn. As the new London emerged from the ashes, it stood as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that, even in the face of disaster, the human spirit can rise, phoenix-like, from the ruins. But let's not kid ourselves. Rebuilding a city was no fairy tale. It was a gritty, grueling affair with more red tape than a bureaucratic Christmas. For those left in the rubble's wake, tales of romantic rebirth were as comforting as a soggy crumpet. Survivors faced stark realities: homelessness, financial ruin, and a long road to reconstruction that would have tested the patience of Job. The Great Fire had done more than just char London's skyline. It had torched the playbook on urban planning. The city's infrastructure was due for an overhaul. The fire served as an unwelcome catalyst. Suddenly, the concept of fireproofing was all the rage. Who'd have thought? New building regulations mandated the use of brick and stone, a shift that would make London's silhouette less like a matchstick forest and more like a robust fortress. The Rebuilding Act of 1667 laid down the law, requiring wider streets and banning those pesky overhanging timbered jetties that had so gleefully spread the flames. Economic realities, however, meant that the journey from blueprint to brick was fraught with compromise. Many of the city's poorest inhabitants found themselves priced out of their neighborhoods, pushed to the fringes as wealthier citizens rebuilt with fire-resistant materials. It's a tale as old as time. Disaster strikes, and the rich get stone, while the poor get stones thrown at them. The social divide widened even as the streets did, a sobering reminder that progress often leaves the least fortunate behind. Politically, the fire forced a re-evaluation of governance and emergency response. The Lord Mayor's dithering during the blaze had exposed a glaring lack of leadership, prompting calls for more decisive disaster management. The birth of a more structured fire brigade was on the horizon, though it would take some time to materialize. In the meantime, the city grappled with the immediate need to prevent another conflagration. The Great Fire had turned London into a cautionary tale, a sort of how not to guide for urban safety. Yet, as with all great disasters, rumors and myths made their rounds, adding layers of intrigue to the narrative. Some claimed the fire was divine retribution for the city's sins, while others whispered of clandestine plots by foreign agents. The real arsonist, however, was a mix of negligence and poor city planning, a less thrilling but far more plausible culprit. The romance of conspiracy theories was tempting, but the truth was far more mundane. A city built of wood and straw was a disaster waiting to happen. Despite the gloomy realities, the fire's legacy was not entirely bleak. It kick-started a wave of architectural innovation, setting the stage for London's transformation into a modern metropolis. Christopher Wren's new St. Paul's Cathedral, with its iconic dome, became a testament to human ingenuity, an architectural marvel that drew eyes upward and spirits with it. It was as if the city, humbled by the inferno, had chosen to rise with its head held high, a literal and metaphorical elevation. The urban landscape evolved, with fireproofing becoming a central tenet of design. Narrow, winding alleys gave way to broader thoroughfares, reducing the risk of future infernos and improving traffic flow, a win for both safety and sanity. The fire had taught London a harsh lesson, and the city, like a chastised but eager student, was determined to learn from its mistakes. Fast forward a few centuries, and the Great Fire still flickers in the collective memory, both a cautionary tale and a symbol of renewal. It serves as a reminder of the fine line between catastrophe and opportunity, a line that cities across the globe continue to walk. In a world increasingly conscious of urban safety, the lessons from 1666 remain relevant, echoing in the fire codes and emergency plans of modern metropolises. The fire's legacy is also one of resilience, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a city and its people. London, once reduced to ash, rose to become a beacon of culture, commerce, and innovation. The Great Fire, with all its destruction, had paved the way for a new chapter, a city rebuilt not just in structure but in spirit. It's a story that resonates through time, a reminder that from the charred remains of disaster, new beginnings can and do emerge. And so, as the embers of the Great Fire fade into history, its lessons burn brightly. The fire was a disaster, yes, but also a catalyst for change, a testament to human resilience and the relentless march of progress. It's a tale as old as cities themselves. When the flames die down, what remains is not just ash, but the promise of renewal. London, scarred but unbowed, stands as a monument to that promise, a city forged in fire, forever rising from its own ashes. You wake up to the sound of church bells, tolling mournfully through the foggy morning air. It's 1348, and you're in a medieval plague town, where your chances of making it to lunch are about as good as a snowball's in a blacksmith's forge. The aroma of fear hangs thicker than the morning mist, mingling with the scent of decay, both literal and societal. You'd think the medieval morning routine includes a hearty breakfast, but here, survival is more pressing than porridge. The Black Death is the unwelcome guest at this medieval shindig, and it's putting the Grim Reaper's efficiency to shame. Between 1347 and 1351, Europe lost 25 to 50 million people. That's about half of Europe's population playing hooky from life, permanently. As you brave the streets, dodging carts piled with bodies like some morbid medieval obstacle course, you can't help but notice the economic chaos. With laborers dropping like flies, the cost of hiring someone to till the fields, or even just to walk your sheep, has shot through the thatched roof. Wages are skyrocketing faster than a knight's ego at a jousting tournament, and the feudal system that once held society together is fraying like an old tunic. Now, if you're expecting a medieval version of a pandemic survival kit, think again. Enter the plague doctors, who look like they've come straight from a Tim Burton film. Those infamous beaked masks weren't just a fashion statement. They were the Middle Ages' answer to a hazmat suit. Stuffed with herbs and spices, the beaks were believed to ward off the miasma, or bad air, thought to spread the plague. Spoiler alert, it didn't work, but it sure made for a memorable look, and it's one of those myths that's as hard to kill as, well, the plague itself. As you navigate this medieval nightmare, you'll see that the Black Death doesn't just snuff out lives, it also turns the social order on its head. With so many peasants pushing daisies, the survivors start demanding better wages and conditions, talk about finding leverage. The old feudal lords, powerless against the tide of change, are left scratching their heads and empty coin purses. The scarcity of labor gives surviving workers a bargaining chip, destabilizing the rigid class structures that have ruled for centuries. It's like a twisted game of musical chairs, only the music stopped and half the players are missing. You might think that in such dire times, people would turn to science and rationality. This is the Middle Ages, where superstition runs wilder than a knight's steed. People are burning incense, ringing bells, and whipping themselves in public displays of penance, hoping to appease a wrathful god. If you're looking for a logical explanation or a cure, you're out of luck. This is an era where the best medical advice is to let leeches have a go at you. Good luck with that. The church, usually the go-to source for comfort and guidance, is in a bit of a pickle itself. Clerics are dropping dead almost as fast as they can be ordained, and the usual religious platitudes are wearing thin. How do you keep the faith when it seems like the Almighty has hit the smite button on humanity? Yet, somehow, amidst the chaos, life staggers on. Bread is still baked, albeit by hands that might not be there tomorrow, and the market square still buzzes with the kind of grim determination that only a plague-ridden town can muster. As the morning wears on, you realize that in this grim tableau, everyone is just trying to get by, one day at a time. The Black Death might be the ultimate party pooper, but it's also a catalyst for change. The societal shifts it triggers will ripple through history, reshaping Europe in ways no one could predict. And as you wander through this medieval minefield, you can't help but wonder what the world will look like when the dust and the bodies finally settle. And as you meander through these streets, where the stench of desperation mingles with the scent of rotting dreams, you realize that the facade of medieval life is peeling away faster than a sunburned night after a crusade. The so-called public services that once kept this town from turning into a cesspool, literally, are crumbling like a loaf of stale bread. Waste removal, more like waste relocation. The streets are littered with refuse, and the rats are having a banquet of biblical proportions. Law enforcement. If you're expecting a medieval cop on the beat, dream on. The town guards are too busy trying to save their own skins to worry about yours. Speaking of decay, let's talk about leadership, or the lack thereof. The plague has thrown a wrench in the gears of governance, and it's spinning out of control like a drunken peasant at a May Day festival. With kings and lords dropping faster than a plague doctor's career prospects, the political landscape is shifting like quicksand. Opportunistic nobles are seizing land and power like it's on a 2-for-1 sale, while weakened rulers are left clutching at straws. Take England's own King Edward Roman III. In 1349, the guy had to issue the infamous Ordinance of Labourers to try and cap wages because, surprise, surprise, workers were demanding more for risking their necks in the fields. Imagine that. A little economic justice in a world gone topsy-turvy. But enough about politics. Let's dive into the delightful world of medieval medicine, a place where optimism goes to die. The go-to remedies are about as effective as trying to cure a headache with a medieval ballad. You've got your leeches, those little bloodsuckers that were the medieval equivalent of taking 2 aspirin. Then there's bloodletting, where they drain your blood in hopes of balancing your humours. Spoiler alert. It's as helpful as a hole in the head. And for the piece de resistance, the live chicken cure. Apparently, strapping a live chicken to your swollen buboes was thought to draw out the disease. I guess if you're clucking like a chicken, you're too distracted to notice you're dying. And if you think that's the end of the absurdity, hold onto your hooded cloaks. The desperation for answers has turned the blame game into an Olympic sport. Jewish communities are often scapegoated, accused of poisoning wells and spreading the plague. This baseless hysteria leads to horrific violence and persecution, fueled by fear and ignorance. It's a dark chapter in history that reminds us how quickly panic can turn neighbors into enemies. In 1349, the Strasbourg massacre saw hundreds of Jews burned alive by a mob convinced they were to blame for the plague. It's a sobering reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty when gripped by fear. Yet, amid this chaos, some are trying to hold the line. The few remaining clerics, those who haven't succumbed to the plague or fled, are struggling to provide solace. But with sermons that ring as hollow as the church bells, they aren't exactly a beacon of hope. You might find solace in the bottom of a tankard if you're lucky enough to stumble upon an alehouse still in operation. After all, in times of plague, the ale flows as freely as the rumours. As the sun begins its lazy descent, casting long shadows over a town that feels like it's trapped in perpetual twilight, you can't help but marvel at the resilience of those who remain. Despite the odds, they cling to life with the tenacity of a barnacle on a ship's hull. In this grim dance of survival, each day is both a victory and a reminder of the fragility of existence. The Black Death might be the ultimate equalizer, but it's also a catalyst for transformation, sowing the seeds of a new world amidst the ruins of the old. So, as you navigate these streets, dodging carts of the dead, and avoiding the gaze of hollow-eyed survivors, you begin to understand the harsh realities of life in a medieval plague town. It's a place where the veneer of civilization is stripped away, revealing the raw, unvarnished truth of human nature. And while the future remains uncertain, one thing is clear: the world will never be the same. As the shadows lengthen, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. But that, my friend, is a story for another day. As the shadows of the plagued town stretch longer, you might think it's time for a midday meal. But in 1348, lunch isn't served with a side of comfort. Instead, it's a grim buffet of survival tactics, and the menu is more about who has what, or rather, who doesn't. The wealthy have barricaded themselves in their manor houses, turning quarantine into a luxury retreat. They hoard supplies like medieval preppers, stockpiling food and essentials, while the rest of the town scrapes by on whatever's left. It's every man for himself, and if you're not part of the elite, you're on your own. The economic disparity is as stark as a knight's armor. In a time when scarcity is the main course, the rich dine on delicacies, while the poor are left to gnaw on hope. You'd think there'd be some medieval Robin Hood swooping in to redistribute the wealth. But alas, altruism is as rare as a unicorn sighting. Speaking of unicorns, let's talk about the plague remedies that are as fanciful as they are feudal. People are shelling out fortunes for crushed emeralds and powdered unicorn horn, ingredients that are as mythical as their healing properties. It's a time when desperation is the main currency, and the market for snake oil is booming. And then there's the church, the spiritual anchor, or so it was supposed to be. The plague tests faith like a final exam with no study guide. With clerics dropping like flies, the institution's veneer of infallibility is cracking. Yet the church finds a way to profit from the chaos, selling indulgences like medieval insurance policies. For a price, you could shave time off your purgatory sentence, a tempting offer when the afterlife seems just a cough away. It's a spiritual stock market crash, where faith is traded for the hope of divine leniency. As if the economic tensions weren't enough, social tensions are bubbling over like a poorly tended cauldron. Class lines, already blurred by the labor shortage, are now battle lines. The rich can afford to flee, to isolate, to survive. Meanwhile, the poor are left in the trenches, battling not just the plague, but also the resentment that festers in its wake. Fear and misinformation spread faster than the disease itself, turning suspicion into a social contagion. It's a powder keg of class warfare, waiting for a spark. In this swirling mess of fear and survival, myths take root like weeds, stubborn and deceptive. Take the nursery rhyme, "Ring a ring, O roses." Many believe it's a relic from the plague days, but that catchy tune didn't appear until much later, in the 19th century. The idea that children in the Middle Ages sang about the horrors surrounding them is as fanciful as a fairy tale. It's a post-plague creation, a comforting fiction that allows later generations to make sense of the senseless. But myths have their charm, don't they? They offer a narrative, a way to wrap your head around the chaos. Yet, the reality of Plague Town life is less poetic. It's a grim dance with death, where each day is a gamble. The poor barter their labor for crumbs, while the wealthy retreat behind walls of privilege. It's a society on the brink, teetering between collapse and transformation. And so, as you navigate this medieval minefield, you begin to see the strands of a new world taking shape. The Black Death is a ruthless editor, cutting away the old to make room for something new. The seeds of change are sown in the fields of despair, and though the harvest is far from certain, it's clear that the world will never look quite the same. But hold onto your hooded cloaks. This tale of survival and change is far from over. As you wander through this medieval maze of chaos and change, the sun hangs high in the sky, casting light on the cultural shifts that are creeping in like ivy on an abandoned castle. It turns out, death makes for a pretty compelling muse. Enter Giovanni Boccaccio, the Italian wordsmith whose imagination is as fertile as the plague-ravaged fields of Europe. His magnum opus, the Decameron, is like a sardonic love letter to the times. 10 characters, 10 stories each, and a whole lot of gallows humor. Written in the aftermath of the Black Death, Boccaccio's tales are a buffet of bawdy escapades and moral dilemmas, reflecting a world where laughter and death are reluctant dance partners. Speaking of dances, let's talk about the Dance of Death, or Dance Macabre, if you're feeling fancy. This grim motif sweeps across Europe like a catchy tune, showing up in artwork that's darker than a moonless night's raid. Imagine skeletons leading the living in a conga line to the grave. Cheerful, I know, but it captures the era's morbid sense of humor and the stark reality that death doesn't discriminate. Rich or poor, saint or sinner, everyone gets an invite to this eternal jig. These images, etched into church walls and painted on canvases, remind folks that the Grim Reaper doesn't care about your social status. All the feasting, frolicking, and storytelling, just a way to thumb your nose at mortality while you still can. Now, if you're thinking chivalrous knights are riding in to save the day, think again. The romantic image of a noble knight in shining armor is about as accurate as a medieval map. In reality, these guys are more concerned with keeping their own heads on their shoulders than rescuing damsels in distress. Amidst the chaos, they're often just another sword in the fight for survival. The days of courtly love and epic quests are replaced by the gritty business of staying alive. The plague has a way of stripping away the pomp and leaving behind raw humanity, sometimes noble, often brutish. As the afternoon sun beats down, it's worth noting that the plague isn't a one-and-done deal. If only, it's more like an unwanted house guest that keeps coming back over and over for centuries. Europe gets smacked by recurrent outbreaks, each one a grim reminder that life is fragile and stability is a fleeting fantasy. These successive waves reshape the continent like a relentless sculptor with a chisel made of fear and change. It's a myth that the Black Death was just a medieval blip. It's more like a centuries-long saga of suffering and adaptation. But here's the kicker. The repeated battering of the plague inadvertently paves the way for the Renaissance. With so many gone, the survivors start thinking a bit more about themselves. Individualism takes root, and people begin to value personal achievements over community conformity. It's like the plague gives the Middle Ages a hard reset, and out of the ashes rises a new focus on human potential. This shift in perspective is like opening the door to the future and finding a world full of art, science, and the occasional bit of scandal. Now, let's circle back to those pervasive myths that cling to history like barnacles on a ship. The idea that the Black Death is just a singular, isolated event is as misguided as trying to cure the plague with a posy. Europe's relationship with the plague is more complicated than a medieval love triangle. It's a recurring drama that reshapes towns, economies, and lives time and again. The constant threat of death instills a sense of urgency, pushing society to adapt, innovate, and sometimes thrive against the odds. It's a brutal teacher, but a compelling one. As the shadows begin to lengthen, casting the town in a sepia tone straight out of a medieval tapestry, you can't help but marvel at the resilience and absurdity of it all. The art, the literature, the cultural shifts, they're all part of humanity's stubborn refusal to bow out quietly. Instead, people find ways to laugh in the face of despair, to create amid destruction. It's a dance of survival, a testament to the human spirit's tenacity, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's room for a little bit of light, or at least a wry smirk. The sun dips lower, and as you navigate this tapestry of history, each thread a story of survival and transformation, you begin to see the contours of a new world taking shape. The Black Death isn't just a harbinger of doom, it's a catalyst for change, a stage setter for the incredible rebirth that lies just beyond the horizon. But that, my friend, is a tale for another time. For now, let's bask in the strange and wonderful dance of history unfolding before us, one step at a time. As the last rays of the sun slip behind the horizon, casting the medieval town in an eerie twilight, it's time to reflect on the grander scheme of things, the long-term ripple effects of this grim visitor, the Black Death. You see, this plague wasn't just a medieval calamity. It was the world's most brutal wake-up call, shaking the foundations of society like a medieval marsh pit. First up, let's talk feudalism, that rigid social structure that made medieval life as predictable as a monk's haircut. The Black Death didn't just put a dent in it, it bulldozed right through. With half the population taking an unexpected exit, laborers suddenly found themselves in short supply and high demand. Peasants, once tethered to the land like serfs to their lords, began to realize they had something previously unheard of: leverage. Wages skyrocketed, and laborers started doing the medieval equivalent of job hopping. It was like a peasant's version of take your pitchfork and shove it. By 1351, this was causing enough economic heartburn that England's Parliament passed the Statute of Labourers, trying to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Imagine trying to cap a geyser with a cork. That's about how effective it was. The seeds of modern labour rights were sown in those tumultuous times, as workers began demanding fair pay and better conditions, setting the stage for later revolutions. It's funny how a little scarcity can make the invisible hand of the market start slapping people around. But it wasn't just the social order that was upended. The demographic shift forced a rethink in farming and commerce. With fewer people to feed, the sprawling fields of Europe began to see more diverse crops. Innovations in farming techniques cropped up, pun intended, like crop rotation and the three-field system, which optimized productivity and set the stage for future agricultural revolutions. It was as if the plague had inadvertently issued a medieval R&D grant. Commerce, too, found new pathways. With the old trade routes disrupted, merchants pivoted, exploring new markets and forging fresh connections. The reduction in population meant fewer mouths to feed, which ironically led to a surplus of goods. It's a bit like inheriting a mansion, but only having enough furniture for a studio apartment. The result? A shift towards a more market-driven economy, setting the stage for capitalism to strut onto the historical stage with all its swagger. Meanwhile, over in the political arena, monarchs saw an opportunity to consolidate power. The chaos of the plague allowed them to tighten their grip, centralizing authority that had been scattered among bickering nobles. King Edward Roman III of England, for example, used the turmoil to strengthen the monarchy, laying groundwork that would support future centralized states. It's like the plague handed monarchs a historical cheat code for power consolidation. Yet, the plague also highlighted humanity's penchant for repeating mistakes. Despite the devastation, the same patterns of fear and scapegoating played out, with Jewish communities facing horrific persecution. It's a sobering reminder that while societies can be remarkably resilient, they're also maddeningly prone to the same follies. It's like watching a bad sequel, same plot, different setting. And about those dark ages, a term as misleading as medieval maps. Far from being a stagnant period, this was a time of profound transformation. Sure, it was grim, but it was also a crucible of change, igniting advancements that would fuel the Renaissance and beyond. The myth of a stagnant, unenlightened era crumbles under the weight of evidence. This was no dark abyss. It was the dawn before the dawn. So, what lessons can we glean from this morbid chapter of history? For one, human resilience is as tough as a knight's armor. People adapt, innovate, and find ways to survive, even in the shadow of death. Yet the folly of scapegoating and fear reveals an Achilles heel that's as old as time. As you stand at the edge of this medieval town, watching the stars flicker to life in a sky untainted by city lights, you can't help but marvel at the enduring dance of history, an intricate choreography of resilience, adaptation, and the occasional misstep. The Black Death was more than a pandemic. It was a pivot point, reshaping society in ways no one could have predicted. And as the echoes of that distant past fade into the night, they leave behind a legacy of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest times, change is not only possible but inevitable. And there you have it, a tale of strife and survival, where humanity's dance with death laid the groundwork for a new world. As the plague town fades into memory, its lessons linger, etched into the annals of history like a footprint on a sandy shore, temporary, yet enduring. Porbandar in the late 1800, a quaint coastal town in India where the sun shone as brightly as the young Mohandas Gandhi's curiosity. But don't let the idyllic setting fool you. While other kids were playing with kites, young Mohandas was busy mastering the art of persuasion, begging his older brother, Laxmidas, for a few paise to fuel his sweet tooth. You see, Gandhi had a penchant for sweets, and not just any sweets, but the kind that made his mother Kasturba throw up her hands in exasperation. It said he'd do just about anything for a piece of jaggery, a traditional Indian treat. He was quite the negotiator even then, although his brother might argue that pest was a more accurate description. Fast forward a few years, and we find our young hero navigating the halls of London, armed with a mission, to become the quintessential English gentleman. Spoiler alert, it didn't go quite as expected. You know, Gandhi's transformation from a shy, awkward law student to the figure of moral authority we know today didn't happen overnight. It was more like a series of hilarious misadventures, the first of which began with his wardrobe. The man spent a small fortune, nearly £20, which was no chump change in 1888, on a brand new suit, hoping to blend in. But try as he might, the stiff collars and top hats didn't quite gel with him. Picture a penguin trying to waddle through the jungle, and you'll get the idea. Oh, and the food. Let's not forget Gandhi's epic struggle with British cuisine. His first encounter with boiled vegetables was nothing short of gastronomic betrayal, and it only solidified his resolve to stay true to his vegetarian roots. Imagine his relief when he stumbled upon the Vegetarian Society in London, a group where he could finally dine without fear of encountering a rogue sausage. Gandhi even became an executive committee member, because what better way to embrace English society than by promoting a diet that shunned its beloved fish and chips? Despite these challenges, Gandhi's time in London was more than just culinary and sartorial missteps. It was here he began to devour books like they were going out of style, reading everything from law tomes to the Bhagavad Gita. This literary feast was where he first tasted the ideas of Henry David Thoreau and Leo Tolstoy, whose thoughts on civil disobedience and non-violent resistance would let us spice up his own philosophies. But let's not romanticize too much. Gandhi's early years were less about grand visions and more about trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. He was a young man grappling with two very different worlds, the traditional Indian values he was raised with and the modern Western ideals he was being taught. It was this internal conflict that would eventually forge the steel in his spine, allowing him to lead with a vision that was both unique and universally compelling. While the myth of Gandhi often paints him as a saintly figure, let's not ignore the human side, the one who struggled, stumbled, and sometimes snacked his way through life's challenges. It's easy to imagine him, a bit disheveled, a bit out of place, but always ready to laugh at the absurdities of his own situation. It was this ability to see the humor in the human condition that made him relatable, a real person behind the revered icon. So there we have young Mohandas, stepping out of his comfort zone in more ways than one. From Porbandar streets to the bustling avenues of London, each experience added a layer to his evolving character. It's a reminder that visionaries aren't born overnight. They're shaped by the jigsaw puzzle of life, one awkward piece at a time. And while Gandhi's early attempts at fitting might have been more comedy than triumph, they were crucial steps on the road to becoming the leader who would go on to change the world. So, we've left young Mohandas grappling with London's stiff collars and boiled vegetables, but let's change the scene to something a bit warmer, both in climate and in the crucible of social change. Enter South Africa, circa 1893, where Gandhi would unexpectedly find his calling. Now, most people visit South Africa for its safaris or stunning coastlines. Gandhi, however, got a ticket for the ultimate social justice adventure, though he didn't ask for it. Picture this: a 24-year-old Gandhi, fresh from the shores of India with a law degree and a head full of ideas, stepping onto South African soil with a level of optimism only matched by his naivety. His mission: a one-year stint to sort out a legal mess for a wealthy businessman, Dada Abdullah. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, what Gandhi didn't know was that his first taste of South African hospitality would come with a side of racial discrimination, a dish he wasn't prepared to stomach. Cue the infamous train incident in Pietermaritzburg, a town whose name is as long as the list of grievances Gandhi would soon have. It was a chilly June evening, and Gandhi, armed with a first-class ticket, was minding his own business when the conductor decided that his brown skin wasn't a match for the plush seats of first class. Gandhi, ever the gentleman, produced his ticket, only to be met with the kind of hostility that's hard to digest, even with a stiff drink. When he refused to budge, he was unceremoniously booted off the train, literally. It was a moment worthy of cinematic drama, but for Gandhi, it was a harsh slap of reality. Now, you might think that such an experience would send him packing back to India, but Gandhi wasn't one to back down. Instead, he spent that frosty night in the waiting room of the Pyrameritsburg station, a place that would soon be remembered not for its comforts, but for igniting a spark in Gandhi's heart. If there's one thing Gandhi knew how to do, it was to turn personal affronts into public crusades. The next morning, instead of retreating, he decided to stay and fight, and thus began his journey into activism, fueled by the kind of quiet rage that propels legends. But hold on, before you get swept away by the romance of the righteous underdog story, let's take a closer look at Gandhi's early activism. You see, Gandhi's initial approach was far from flawless. His ideas were sometimes as idealistic as they were impractical. He believed that if people just saw the truth, they would surely come to their senses. It's a bit like expecting a cat to abandon its nap for a game of fetch. Charming, but unlikely. At the time, South Africa was a melting pot of racial tensions and economic disparities. It was a place where the colonial powers were busy playing monopoly with real estate and human lives. The British Empire, which Gandhi initially respected, was not exactly known for its benevolent rule. It was more about squeezing resources and less about spreading democracy. Gandhi soon realized that the laws were stacked against anyone who wasn't white, and this was no oversight. It was by design. Being the sharp thinker he was, Gandhi knew that going head-to-head with the powers that be required more than just moral outrage. It needed strategy. He began organizing the Indian community in South Africa, urging them to assert their rights. He penned petitions, wrote letters, and mobilized people with the kind of zeal that made local authorities nervous. In 1894, he helped establish the Natal Indian Congress, which sounds like a fancy legislative body, but was really just a group of determined individuals ready to take on Goliath with a slingshot of truth. Gandhi's efforts weren't just about fighting for Indian rights. He was planting the seeds for something much larger, the philosophy of Satyagraha, or truth force. The concept was simple yet revolutionary. Resist oppression through non-violent means. It was Gandhi's way of saying, I'll see your injustice and raise you with peaceful protest. He believed that truth and love were the ultimate weapons against tyranny, and while that sounds poetic, it was also a radical departure from the fight fire with fire mentality of the time. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't an instant success story. Gandhi's early attempts at activism often met with indifference or outright hostility. The authorities saw him as a thorn in their side, while many in the Indian community were skeptical of his methods. After all, non-violence didn't offer the kind of instant gratification that more aggressive tactics might. Yet, Gandhi persisted, honing his skills in negotiation and public speaking, transforming from a solitary lawyer into a charismatic leader. And here's the kicker. Gandhi's time in South Africa was supposed to be just a year-long gig. Instead, he stayed for over 2 decades, constantly adapting and refining his approach to activism. He learned that change wasn't just about loud protests or fiery speeches. It was about patience, resilience, and the willingness to look absurd if it meant staying true to your principles. In essence, Gandhi's early days in South Africa were a masterclass in the art of turning personal indignities into catalysts for societal change. So, as we leave Gandhi in South Africa, grappling with the complexities of race, law, and justice, remember that his journey was anything but straightforward. It was filled with missteps, moments of doubt, and the occasional dash of comedic naivety. Yet, through it all, Gandhi remained committed to his vision, slowly sculpting his ideas into the formidable force they would become. And while the train incident in Pyrameritsburg may have been the spark, it was Gandhi's relentless pursuit of justice that fanned the flames of change, a fire that would soon spread beyond the borders of South Africa, lighting the path toward a new world. As Gandhi stood at the nexus of his South African odyssey and the beckoning call of his homeland, India was simmering with the kind of tension that makes a pressure cooker look like a bubble bath. The year was 1915, and the subcontinent was a mosaic of princely states, colonial exploitation, and an increasingly restless population. The British Raj, that infamous empire where the sun supposedly never set, was more concerned with its tea plantations than the brewing storm of nationalist fervour. And into this powder keg walked Gandhi, fresh off the boat, with a suitcase full of ideals and a head full of strategic plans. Now, Gandhi returned to India not as a hero, but more like an enigmatic figure with a reputation that was part myth, part mystery. He was greeted with curiosity and a bit of skepticism. Think of him as the original influencer whose followers weren't quite sure if they were ready to smash that like button. But Gandhi had a plan, and it was as audacious as it was unconventional. He was going to win independence not by swords or bullets, but with the power of non-violence and civil disobedience. Imagine telling a nation that had endured centuries of oppression to resist with nothing but truth and patience. It's like trying to stop a charging bull with a flower. Idealistic, to say the least. Gandhi's first major move was to immerse himself in the heart of India, quite literally, by travelling third class across the country. Forget about luxury travel. Gandhi was all about experiencing the reality of his fellow Indians. He wanted to feel the grit under his sandals, see the poverty firsthand, and understand the pulse of the people he aimed to lead. It was during these travels that he realized the extent of British exploitation, the economic stranglehold that left millions of Indians living in abject poverty while their resources fattened foreign Kafirs. One of Gandhi's early campaigns upon his return was the Champaran Satyagraha in 1917. Champaran, a district in Bihar, was the stage for a real-life David vs. Goliath showdown. The local farmers, forced to grow indigo under oppressive conditions, were caught in a cycle of debt and destitution. The British planters had a nice little racket going, and they weren't about to let a bespectacled man in a loincloth ruin their party. But Gandhi, with his flair for turning the mundane into the monumental, launched a movement that was as much about dignity as it was about economic justice. Gandhi's approach in Champaran was nothing short of a masterclass in grassroots activism. He conducted extensive surveys, collected testimonies, and brought the plight of the farmers to the forefront of national consciousness. By the end of it, the British were compelled to concede, granting concessions to the indigo farmers. This wasn't just a victory for the farmers. It was a demonstration of Gandhi's unique brand of leadership, one that combined empathy with strategic acumen. But let's not put Gandhi on too high a pedestal just yet. His methods, while visionary, sometimes bordered on the absurd. Take, for example, his obsession with the spinning wheel or the charkha. Gandhi saw it as a symbol of self-reliance and a direct challenge to the British textile industry, which had effectively decimated Indian weaving. So he encouraged Indians to spin their own cloth, khadi, and boycott British goods. Noble in theory, but in practice. There were days when Gandhi's spinning wheel seemed to conspire against him, as if it were a mischievous child refusing to cooperate. Yet Gandhi persisted, turning the charkha into a powerful symbol of resistance. It's a testament to his charisma that he could make spinning yarn a revolutionary act. Then we have the Salt March of 1930, a 240-mile trek from Sabarmati to the coastal village of Dandi, which sounds like a leisurely stroll until you consider the blistering Indian heat and the fact that Gandhi was almost 60 years old. The salt tax, imposed by the British, was the perfect representation of colonial overreach. It was a basic necessity turned into a luxury. Gandhi's march was a masterstroke of political theatre, a non-violent poke in the eye of imperial authority. Thousands joined him on this sandy odyssey, and by the time they reached the sea, the world was watching. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The Salt March, while inspiring, was also strategically brilliant. By focusing on salt, Gandhi picked a fight that was both universal and deeply personal to every Indian. Salt was more than seasoning, it was survival. By breaking the salt laws, Gandhi was tapping into a well of discontent that transcended social and economic barriers. It was a moment where the personal became political, and the political became personal, a classic Gandhi move. Of course, the British weren't about to let Gandhi have the last laugh. The crackdown was swift, with arrests and detentions that only fueled the fire of resistance. But Gandhi, ever the tactician, knew that every arrest was a headline, every detention a spotlight on the injustice of colonial rule. It was a game of chess, and Gandhi was playing for the long haul, one step ahead in a match that would last over a decade. And so, as we leave Gandhi pacing the beaches of Dandi, with salt in his hand and resolve in his heart, remember that his path was never straight or simple. It was a journey of trial and error, of profound insights and occasional missteps. But through it all, Gandhi remained steadfast, a symbol of hope and resilience. His strategy of non-violence wasn't just a moral choice. It was a calculated response to the complexities of colonial rule, a way to engage an empire without losing his soul. As we know, the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and contradictions, but Gandhi was never one to shy away from the absurdity of it all. And perhaps that's what made him so compelling, a leader who understood that in the grand theatre of life, sometimes the best weapon is a well-timed laugh. And speaking of well-timed laughs, let's dive into Gandhi's penchant for fasting, a strategy that left colonial administrators scratching their heads and his followers just hoping he wouldn't keel over. You see, Gandhi was a master of the dramatic pause, not just in speeches, but in sustenance. Fasting was his go-to move when negotiations hit a wall, a sort of "you can't ignore me if I'm fainting" approach. It's like the ultimate power nap, except instead of recharging, he was trying to reset the moral compass of an entire nation. Gandhi's first high-profile fast was in 1924, a 21-day affair to promote Hindu-Muslim unity. Now, fasting as a political tool is like bringing a feather to a sword fight. It shouldn't work, but somehow it does. The British, expecting fiery protests and civil unrest, were instead confronted with a man quietly starving himself into a moral high ground. The absurdity wasn't lost on anyone. It's like fighting a heavyweight bout by refusing to throw a punch, yet still managing to win on points. These fasts were more than just personal sacrifices. They were public performances with a strategic edge. By refusing food, Gandhi put the focus squarely on the injustice he was trying to highlight. And it worked. Newspapers around the world covered his fasts, turning his personal ordeal into a global spectacle. It was a PR coup wrapped in a spiritual endeavor, a neat trick that kept both the British Empire and his own followers on their toes. Each fast was a gamble, a high-stakes game of chicken where Gandhi bet his life on the power of conscience. But let's not forget the practical side of this fasting business. It wasn't all divine inspiration and moral clarity. Gandhi was acutely aware of the economic and social inequalities that plagued India, and his fasts often highlighted these issues. Consider his 1932 fast unto death, against the British government's decision to segregate India's electoral system by caste. This wasn't just a spiritual stand. It was a calculated move to spotlight the divisive tactics of colonial rule. The fast lasted 6 days, and ended only when the British agreed to negotiate. It was a reminder that Gandhi's moral compass was always tuned to the political realities of his time. Of course, Gandhi's love-hate relationship with modern technology added another layer of complexity to his leadership. He was a paradox wrapped in a dodi, embracing simplicity while navigating the complexities of global politics. Gandhi famously shunned modern machinery, viewing it as a threat to traditional Indian livelihoods. He was the original Luddite, but unlike the machine breakers of the Industrial Revolution, Gandhi's resistance was philosophical, not physical. Yet he wasn't entirely anti-tech. Take his relationship with the railways, for instance. While Gandhi criticized industrialization, he had no qualms about using trains to crisscross the subcontinent, spreading his message of non-violence. It's like being against fast food, but still hitting the drive-thru because, well, sometimes you just need a ride. His travels were essential in connecting with ordinary Indians, and the railways offered the kind of mass mobility that Gandhi needed to galvanize support. And let's talk about the printing press, Gandhi's secret weapon in the battle for hearts and minds. He launched Young India and Harijan, newspapers that were as much about disseminating ideas as they were about rallying support. Through these publications, Gandhi reached audiences far beyond his physical presence, making his thoughts accessible to anyone with a few pays and the ability to read. It's a testament to his strategic acumen that he used the very tools of modernity to challenge the systems built upon them. Yet, Gandhi's relationship with technology wasn't without its quirks. Take his disdain for the telephone, which he found intrusive and disruptive. For a man who valued silence and contemplation, the constant ring of a phone was more a torture device than a communication tool. Imagine trying to meditate with a smartphone buzzing every few minutes, not exactly conducive to spiritual enlightenment. So, Gandhi avoided phones like the plague, preferring face-to-face meetings or the written word to convey his thoughts. And speaking of quirks, Gandhi's personal habits often left people puzzled or amused, sometimes both. His daily routine was a blend of ascetic discipline and eccentric rituals. Each day began at 4 a.m., a time when most people are still wrestling with their alarm clocks. But Gandhi greeted the dawn with prayer, meditation, and a brisk walk, setting the tone for a day filled with activism and introspection. His diet was another source of fascination, a culinary journey that was as much about political symbolism as it was about health. Gandhi's meals were simple, often consisting of fruits, nuts, and goat's milk. Yes, goat's milk, because cows, in Gandhi's view, were sacred, and the goat seemed like a reasonable compromise. It's as if he was crafting a menu that was half sacrament, half statement, a daily reminder of his commitment to simplicity and self-reliance. Even Gandhi's wardrobe was a statement in itself. The iconic dhoti, which he spun and wove himself, was both a symbol of Indian self-sufficiency and a practical uniform for a man on the move. By rejecting Western-style clothing, Gandhi was making a broader point about colonial exploitation and economic independence. It was his way of saying, "I'll wear what I make, and I'll make what I wear," a nod to the power of self-sufficiency in the face of imperialism. This sartorial choice, however, did little to impress his adversaries. Winston Churchill, known for his own flair for words, famously referred to him as a half-naked fakir, a jab that only highlighted the cultural chasm between British rulers and the people they governed. But Gandhi, ever the pragmatist, wore the criticism like a badge of honor. To him, the dhoti was more than just clothing. It was a declaration of independence, a challenge to the status quo wrapped in homespun cotton. Yet, for all his quirks, Gandhi's leadership was anything but whimsical. He was a master strategist, a man who understood that the path to independence was not paved with easy victories, but with dogged persistence and unyielding principles. His ability to navigate the political landscape with both moral clarity and tactical savvy was what set him apart, turning the improbable into the inevitable. So, as we leave Gandhi poised on the brink of another fast, or perhaps another march, remember that his journey was a patchwork of contradictions and convictions. He was a man who could see the absurdity in his own methods, yet pressed on with an unwavering belief in their efficacy. And perhaps that's the lesson in Gandhi's leadership, a reminder that the most effective strategies often lie at the intersection of the unexpected and the unwavering. As we stand at the cusp of the next chapter, ready to explore the final stages of his incredible journey, one thing is clear. Gandhi's blend of simplicity and complexity was as much a product of his time as it was a reflection of his unique vision. As we stand on the precipice of Gandhi's final acts, let's take a moment to unravel the enigma of his enduring legacy. You see, the man once dubbed a half-naked fakir by Winston Churchill didn't just drape himself in homespun cotton. He spun a narrative that continues to captivate and confound us. But before we canonize him with halos and hymns, it's crucial to peel back the layers of myth that have thickened like a well-cooked curry over the years. First, let's tackle the saintly image often associated with Gandhi. Sure, he was a purveyor of peace, a maestro of nonviolence whose methods inspired figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Nelson Mandela. But was he a saint in the traditional sense? Not quite. Gandhi was a man of flesh and bone, with all the quirks and contradictions that come with it. He was known to impose his views with a firmness that bordered on authoritarian, especially within his ashrams. His insistence on celibacy, even within marriage, left some of his followers scratching their heads and others downright uncomfortable. So while his spiritual discipline was admirable, it was hardly a one-size-fits-all blueprint for the masses. Then there's the issue of his economic philosophy. Gandhi's vision for India was one of self-sufficiency, a country where each village was an autonomous entity, spinning its own cloth and growing its own food. A noble idea, perhaps, but not exactly scalable in an increasingly industrialized world. Imagine trying to run a tech startup with a hand-cranked computer. Gandhi's emphasis on simplicity was both his strength and his limitation, a double-edged sword that cut through colonial exploitation but also hindered India's potential for economic growth. Yet, for all his imperfections, Gandhi's impact on global civil rights movements is undeniable. His doctrine of satyagraha, or truth force, became the template for peaceful resistance worldwide. When Gandhi led the Salt March in 1930, he wasn't just challenging a salt tax, he was crystallizing a model of activism that would echo through the 20th century and beyond. The sheer audacity of confronting an empire with nothing more than a handful of salt and a heart full of conviction was nothing short of revolutionary. However, it's important to remember that Gandhi's strategies weren't universally embraced, even in his own time. Many of his contemporaries, including prominent Indian leaders like Subhas Chandra Bose, found his methods too passive, too slow. They argued that while Gandhi's non-violent approach was morally uplifting, it was also a marathon in a world that sometimes required a sprint. It's a bit like bringing a yoga mat to a boxing match. Admirable, but potentially ineffective when faced with immediate threats. And let's not forget the partition of India in 1947, a seismic event that Gandhi desperately tried to prevent. Despite his best efforts, the subcontinent was cleaved into two separate nations, India and Pakistan, amidst horrific communal violence. Gandhi's dream of a united India, where Hindus and Muslims coexisted peacefully, was shattered like a porcelain vase in a bullring. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a reminder that even the most influential leaders can't always steer the course of history. Yet, through the triumphs and tribulations, Gandhi's life continues to inspire and perplex. His commitment to nonviolence and truth remains a beacon for those navigating the choppy waters of social change. But his legacy is also a cautionary tale, a reminder that the path to justice is fraught with complexities and compromises. Gandhi was a man who walked barefoot on the sharp edges of history, balancing ideals with realities that often refused to play nice. In the end, what makes Gandhi so compelling is not that he was perfect, but that he was profoundly human. His life was a tapestry of contradictions, woven with threads of idealism and pragmatism, spirituality and politics. He was a visionary who dared to dream of a world where love and truth were more powerful than hate and deceit. And while that dream was never fully realized, it set the stage for generations of activists to come. So as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through Gandhi's life, let's leave the myths behind and embrace the man for who he really was, a complex, flawed, and ultimately extraordinary leader. His legacy is not just a chapter in history books, but a living dialogue that continues to evolve, challenging us to look beyond the headlines and see the deeper truths that lie beneath. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real magic of Gandhi, his ability to inspire us to seek the truth in a world that often thrives on illusion. In the grand tapestry of medieval myth-making, nothing catches the modern imagination quite like the chastity belt, a contraption allegedly designed to keep the amorous activities of knights' wives on lockdown while their husbands gallivanted off to the Crusades. But here's the twist. The chastity belt is basically the medieval version of Bigfoot. Lots of chatter, zero credible sightings. Contrary to popular belief, these devices weren't handed out like party favors across Europe. In fact, they were about as common in the Middle Ages as Wi-Fi. Let's unravel this tangled web of misinformation. First off, the idea that chastity belts were a staple of medieval life is about as accurate as using Game of Thrones as a historical textbook. The reality is, these belts didn't pop up in any significant number until the 19th century, a time when the Victorians were busy turning medieval history into their own peculiar soap opera. A few rusty examples began surfacing in museums, touted as authentic relics, but many of these were about as genuine as a $3 bill. The myth became further entrenched thanks to some particularly enthusiastic museum curators of the 1800. Picture this. A curator stumbles upon a curious metal contraption. It's rusty, it's mysterious, and it looks just uncomfortable enough to fit the narrative of medieval prudence. So they slap a sign on it declaring it a chastity belt, ignoring the fact that it was more likely a misunderstood piece of horse tack or a particularly aggressive type of armor. These curators weren't just gatekeeping history. They were actively riding it, and with a flair for drama that would make Shakespeare proud. Now, why did this myth take hold in the first place? Let's talk economics and social dynamics. In a time when the average medieval Joe was more concerned with surviving the plague than policing virtue, chastity belts would have been a luxury item, like a medieval Birkin bag. Iron wasn't cheap, and neither was the craftsmanship required to make something so intricate. The belts would have cost a small fortune, far more than your average knight was willing to spend on keeping his lady's honor under lock and key. And honestly, with wars to fight and lands to manage, who had the time? The legend of the chastity belt also gained traction due to the Middle Ages' reputation as a time of sexual repression and moral rigidity, something that, surprise, surprise, was largely exaggerated by later generations. The truth is, medieval folks had a complex relationship with sex and morality, one that was less about iron underwear and more about ecclesiastical influence and societal norms. Sure, there were rules, but they were more guidelines than hard laws. So, who really benefited from the perpetuation of the chastity belt myth? For starters, those Victorian museum curators got to add a spicy twist to their historical displays, drawing crowds eager to gawk at an imagined past of ironclad virtue. Then there were the moralists and the riders, spinning tales of chaste damsels and valiant knights, all while conveniently ignoring the more nuanced and less marketable truths of the medieval period. In the end, the chastity belt stands not as a symbol of medieval prudence, but as a testament to our enduring fascination with the past and our willingness to believe the most scandalous stories about it. The real history of the Middle Ages. It's messy, it's complicated, and surprise. It's not all about larking up your lady's nether regions. Stay tuned, because there's more to medieval history than meets the eye, and we're just getting started. Now, let's pivot from iron underwear to the far more intoxicating world of courtly love, a medieval Game of Thrones where hearts were supposedly won with poetry, pining, and a pinch of scandal. Picture this, a noblewoman, ensconced in a castle, receiving a sonnet from a lovesick troubadour who's more interested in rhyming couplets than actual coupling. Welcome to the medieval version of a soap opera, where love was less about passion and more about political maneuvering. Courtly love was the rage among the medieval elite, those who had both the time and the leisure to indulge in such emotional theatrics. But let's get one thing straight. This wasn't your typical boy meets girl story. It was more like boy meets girl and everyone pretends not to notice their spouses. The whole concept revolved around the idea of an unattainable love, often directed towards a woman married to another man. Talk about awkward dinner parties. This peculiar dance of desire was governed by a set of bizarre rules that would make a modern relationship coach weep. According to Andreas Capellanus, a 12th century chap who literally wrote the book on love, aptly titled De Amore, there were no fewer than 31 rules to follow. And no, they weren't the kind you'd find in a self-help guide. Rule number 1, marriage is no real excuse for not loving. And there it is, folks, a medieval pass for extramarital affairs, as long as it was all in the name of artful affection. But why were these romantic entanglements even a thing? Enter the socio-economic factor. The upper crust of medieval society had the luxury of time and resources, which meant they could afford to turn love into an elaborate game. While the peasants were busy worrying about the next harvest, the nobles were busy worrying about their next poetic conquest. Courtly love was also a way to flex one's cultural muscles. A well-versed lord or lady could demonstrate their sophistication and education through the art of love. This was the medieval equivalent of Instagramming a latte art photo. It was all about showing off your taste and refinement. And let's not forget the political angle. These romantic endeavors were often strategic, strengthening alliances and ensuring loyalty among the noble circles. Love was a chess game, and everyone was a pawn. Now, let's talk about the disconnect between these romantic ideals and the often harsh realities of medieval marriages. Spoiler alert, marriages back then were about as romantic as a tax audit. They were more about land, money, and power than about love. A marriage contract was essentially a business deal, usually struck before the bride and groom had even hit puberty. According to a study of medieval England, the average age for marriage among noblewomen was around 12 to 14 years old, while their husbands were often in their late 20s or older. Cue the uncomfortable shuffling. So, where does this leave our star-crossed lovers of the courtly love tradition? In a sweet spot of plausible deniability, that's where. They could engage in these emotionally charged but physically restrained relationships without upsetting the political apple cart. It was a win-win. The thrill of romance without the messy consequences of, say, an illegitimate heir muddying up the family tree. Primary sources, like the love letters of Heloise and Abelard, give us a peek behind the curtain of these medieval love stories. Heloise was a nun and scholar, Abelard a philosopher, and together they had an affair that was both intellectually and emotionally charged. Their letters reveal the tension between their passionate love and the societal constraints they faced. Abelard's eventual castration, yes, you heard that right, by Heloise's furious relatives was a stark reminder of the risks involved in straying too far from the marital path. Ultimately, the practice of courtly love highlights the stark contrast between the romanticized ideals of the time and the often grim realities of medieval life. It's a tale as old as time, the yearning for passion in a world that prioritized duty over desire. So while the troubadours sang of undying love, the real story was one of calculated risks and political chess. As we peel back the layers of history, we uncover a world where love was both a game and a gamble, one where the stakes were high, and the consequences could be, quite literally, life-altering. In our next episode of Medieval Mayhem, we'll dive into the labyrinthine world of medieval marriage contracts and dowries, where love was often the least of anyone's concerns. Stay tuned, because this history lesson is far from over. Now, as we leave the tangled web of medieval marriage contracts and dowries, let's plunge headfirst into the bizarre intersection of medieval medicine and sexuality. Strap in, because we're about to meet a rogues gallery of medical practices that make modern homeopathy look like cutting-edge science. Back in the Middle Ages, understanding the human body was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark. With limited knowledge, and no Google to offer a quick diagnosis, medieval medics concocted treatments that seem more like scenes from a Monty Python sketch than medical reality. Let's start with our slippery friends, leeches. These little bloodsuckers were the medieval equivalent of duct tape, touted as a cure for everything from headaches to, you guessed it, sexual dysfunction. The logic, if you could call it that, was rooted in the ancient belief of balancing the four humours. Too much blood. Slap on a leech and voila, you're on the road to recovery, or more accurately, the road to anemia. Now, leeches might seem like the zaniest part of the medieval medical toolkit, but hold onto your potions. Medieval apothecaries offered a veritable cocktail menu of bizarre brews, each more outlandish than the last. Take the love potion number 9 of its day, mandrake root. Known for its hallucinogenic properties, mandrake was believed to stimulate desire. However, it also had a tendency to induce hallucinations, which might explain why some medieval lovers were convinced their partners were literal gods or goddesses. Then there's the notorious Spanish fly, a potion made from ground blister beetles. This was believed to be an aphrodisiac, and in a way, it was. It caused an intense burning sensation that mimicked arousal. But before you picture medieval Casanovas scattering beetle dust like confetti, know this. The stuff was more likely to send you to the grave than the bedroom. High doses could cause anything from kidney failure to death. Talk about killing the mood. Economic motivations were often the secret ingredient in these medieval medical practices. The less than scrupulous practitioners of the time were quick to peddle these potions and treatments, preying on the desperate and the lovesick. It was a thriving industry. Think of it as the medieval version of the wellness industry, complete with snake oil salesmen and charlatans ready to profit from the latest fads. But let's not be too harsh on those medieval medics. They were doing their best with the limited tools and knowledge they had. The line between magic and medicine was blurry, and superstition often filled the gaps left by science. For instance, the idea of using a witch's brew wasn't just a Halloween trope. It was a serious attempt at medicine. Ingredients could include anything from bat wings to the ashes of a loved one's hair, each believed to have mystical properties capable of curing ailments or sparking desire. Now, modern minds might scoff at these concoctions, but they reveal a fascinating blend of superstition and early science. These potions and remedies reflect the medieval struggle to understand and control the capricious forces of nature and human biology. In a world where the Black Death could decimate a village overnight, and childbirth was a gamble with death, who could blame them for grasping at any remedy, no matter how far-fetched? This blend of science and superstition was mirrored in the broader economic and social dynamics of the time. With life expectancy hovering around 30 to 40 years, there was an urgency to live and love while you could. The pursuit of love, or at least lust, created a market for those willing to exploit it. Apothecaries, healers, and even some religious figures became purveyors of these elixirs, each promising a quick fix for the heart's, or body's, desires. What's truly remarkable is how these practices have endured in one form or another. Take a stroll down the supplement aisle of any modern pharmacy, and you'll find echoes of these medieval remedies. From ginseng to ginkgo biloba, the allure of a natural cure remains irresistible, even if the science is shaky at best. As we navigate this labyrinth of medieval medicine, we see a reflection of timeless human desires, the quest for love, the fear of mortality, and the hope for a miracle cure. In a world where life was often short and brutal, these potions offered a glimmer of magic and mystery, a hope that, just maybe, the right combination of ingredients could unlock the secrets of the human heart. So, while we chuckle at the thought of medieval lords and ladies smearing themselves with dubious ointments or swallowing noxious brews, let's remember that their world was one of imagination and belief in the impossible. And in this mix of superstition and science, we find the roots of modern medicine and the enduring human quest to understand ourselves and our desires. As we prepare to plunge deeper into this medieval morass, stay tuned for more tales of historical hijinks and human folly. Next up, we'll explore the darker side of medieval sexuality, where sin, salvation, and scandal collide in a kaleidoscope of moral complexity. From the tangled web of medieval medicine, we now traverse into the equally convoluted realm of the Church's role in regulating sexual behavior. Picture a time when the Church wasn't just a spiritual guide. It was the neighborhood watch, moral authority, and judge all wrapped into one. And oh boy, did they have opinions about what you did behind closed doors. In a world where the confessional was as ubiquitous as a modern-day coffee shop, the Church wielded its power like a medieval influencer, except instead of selling you detox teas, they were hawking salvation. But don't let the pious facade fool you. Behind the scenes, the Church was a well-oiled machine with an eye for profit, especially when it came to matters of sin and indulgences. Let's start with the basics, confession. The medieval confessional was the original tell-all series, where parishioners spilled their secrets to a priest who, in theory, was bound by confidentiality. In reality, this was less about spiritual healing and more about maintaining control. Imagine airing your dirty laundry, only to have it filed away in the Church's mental Rolodex, ready to be used as leverage when needed. Penance was the Church's version of a moral payment plan, where sins were repaid through prayer, fasting, or a good old-fashioned pilgrimage. But here's the kicker. The Church quickly realized that penance was a gold mine. Enter indulgences, essentially a get-out-of-purgatory free card, available for the right price. By the 14th century, indulgences were big business, and the Church was the medieval equivalent of a Fortune 500 company. For a few coins, you could shave years off your time in purgatory, making indulgences the ecclesiastical version of a Black Friday sale. This raked in cash faster than a medieval bake sale, but it was also a thinly veiled attempt to funnel money directly from the hands of the faithful into the coffers of the Church. When Pope Leo X needed funds to build St. Peter's Basilica, indulgences were the go-to solution. Why rely on tithes when you could literally sell salvation? This wasn't just a religious practice, it was a financial strategy. Now, about those celibate monks and nuns. You might think they lived lives as austere as a monk's cell, but peel back the layers, and the reality is far more scandalous. The ideal of celibacy was often more honored in the breach than in the observance. Monasteries were supposed to be bastions of chastity, yet they often resembled a medieval version of the real world with a frog. In fact, a number of historical records, like the infamous Visitation records, reveal that scandalous behavior was not uncommon, with reports of monks and nuns engaging in everything from secret trysts to outright debauchery. One particularly juicy example comes from the 15th century nunnery of Littlemore Priory in England, where the prioress, Catherine Wells, was accused of having a child with a local priest. Talk about breaking the vow of chastity in style. The church, ever the practical entity, often turned a blind eye to these indiscretions, as long as the monastery paid its dues and kept the scandal under wraps. And let's not forget about the economic angle. Monasteries and nunneries were powerhouses of economic activity, owning vast tracts of land and employing many of the local peasantry. They were the medieval equivalents of corporate conglomerates, wielding both spiritual and economic power. So while the church preached celibacy and piety, it was also profiting from the very human failings it claimed to condemn. Now, if this sounds like a medieval soap opera, that's because it was. The church's moral authority was a carefully constructed facade, one that often crumbled under the weight of its own hypocrisy. But here's the thing. Despite the scandals and the profiteering, the church's influence was undeniable. It was the glue that held medieval society together, a complex blend of faith, power, and politics that shaped the lives of millions. As we peel back the layers of history, we see that the church's role in regulating sexual behavior was as much about controlling the narrative as it was about enforcing morality. The confessional was a tool of power. Indulgences were an economic strategy, and celibacy was a convenient myth. Yet, these practices left an indelible mark on the medieval world, shaping not only the lives of those who lived it, but also the stories we tell about them today. So, as we continue our journey through the labyrinth of medieval morality, consider this. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The church's blend of faith and finance might seem like a relic of the past, but echoes of this complex relationship are still felt today. Whether in the headlines or in our own communities, the interplay of morality, power, and economics remains a fascinating and enduring part of the human story. Stay tuned as we explore these themes further, diving into the ways the medieval church's practices have reverberated through history, influencing everything from politics to popular culture. There's more to uncover, and the intrigue is far from over. And so, as we turn the last page of our medieval saga, let's stitch together this quilt of misconceptions, myths, and stark realities that have artfully tangled themselves into the tapestry of history. It's time to reflect on how the medieval world, with all its ironclad chastity belts, poetic courtly love, dubious medical practices, and morally flexible church, has left its indelible mark on our collective imagination. The gap between the romanticized views and the gritty reality is about as wide as the English Channel, and just as murky. Take the chastity belt, our medieval Bigfoot. This myth, born not from the loins of history, but from the fertile imaginations of 19th century Victorians, still captures the popular imagination today. Why, you ask? Because the idea of knights locking up their wives' virtue while gallivanting off on crusades is a narrative dripping with drama, intrigue, and just the right amount of scandal to keep us enthralled. It's a classic case of history as entertainment, a tale tailor-made to draw crowds and sell museum tickets. Yet the reality is as cold and hard as the iron those belts were supposedly made from. Chastity belts were more likely the products of a Victorian imagination rather than actual medieval practice. Iron was expensive back then, folks, and they had better things to do with it, like making swords and shields. Courtly love, too, serves as a reminder that what we crave is often not the truth, but a good story. With its sonnets and serenades, this medieval soap opera gave us the trope of unattainable love, elevating the art of longing into a quasi-religious experience. But beneath the flowery language and wistful glances lay a world driven by political alliances and strategic marriages, where love was less about the heart and more about the family crest. It was an emotional investment with the potential for high returns in power and influence. Who knew that behind the troubadour's lute was a Machiavellian mind? Then there's the bizarre world of medieval medicine, a concoction of superstition and desperation that would make even a modern quack blush. Leeches, mandrake root, and Spanish fly, these were the medieval equivalents of the latest health fads, with about as much scientific backing. Yet they thrived because they tapped into a universal desire, the search for a miracle cure. Even today, the lure of the quick fix, the magic pill, remains irresistible, proving that while our methods may have evolved, our hopes have not. The church, with its indulgences and confessional booths, provides a masterclass in the art of wielding power. By monetizing morality, the medieval church effectively turned sin into a revenue stream, a business model that would make a modern-day marketer proud. Yet, for all its failings, the church was a stabilizing force in an unstable world, a paradox that underscores the complexity of history. Its legacy is a complicated one, a testament to the tangled relationship between faith and finance, morality and power. So, what can modern society learn from these medieval misconceptions? For starters, the persistence of these myths highlights our tendency to prefer the sensational over the mundane. We love a good story, even if it's more fiction than fact. The challenge lies in recognizing the allure of these narratives while seeking the truth beneath them. History, after all, is not just a collection of dates and events, but a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, and follies of humanity. In the end, while the medieval world may feel distant, its echoes are surprisingly close. The parallels between past and present remind us that human nature, with all its quirks and contradictions, remains a constant. We are still captivated by the same desires, driven by the same ambitions, and susceptible to the same myths that define the Middle Ages. As we close the book on this medieval journey, consider this. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We may not wear chastity belts or consult apothecaries for love potions, but we still navigate a world of myths and realities, seeking love, power, and meaning in our own modern ways. Perhaps the real lesson of the Middle Ages is not how different we are, but how much we share with those who came before us. And there you have it, a romp through the riotous, romantic, and often ridiculous world of medieval sexuality. From chastity belts to courtly love, from leech therapy to indulgence sales, we've traversed the landscape of medieval misconceptions. So next time you hear a tale of knightly virtue or medieval medicine, remember to look beyond the myth and into the heart of history. Because, at the end of the day, it's the stories we tell and the truths we uncover that shape our understanding of the past and perhaps even our path to the future. You're a Roman matron, and the world is your oyster. Well, if by world you mean your household, and by oyster you mean a lot of responsibilities, welcome to life in the Roman Empire, where being a woman is a full-time job and then some. Let's be honest, if you were expecting a life of lounging in togas and eating grapes, you've been misinformed. Your days are packed with managing the domus, juggling societal expectations, and navigating a legal system that treats you like a permanent minor. Social expectations for you are as rigid as a Roman aqueduct. You're the keystone of the family, expected to manage the household with the efficiency of a Roman legion. And forget about being the boss. You might be the head of domestic operations, but legally, you're more like the assistant manager. Your husband, or in some cases your father, holds the title of paterfamilias, the family patriarch with the power to decide everything from finances to family members' lives. Sounds fair, right? Speaking of fairness, let's dive into the Roman legal system's twisted take on women's rights. Spoiler alert, it's not great. The 12 Tables, Rome's foundational legal code from around 450 BCE, left much to be desired for the fairer sex. Women couldn't vote or hold public office, and their legal identities were tied to the men in their lives. Marriage contracts weren't a matter of romance or personal choice. No, they were more like business mergers, often arranged to strengthen family alliances or boost social standing. When it comes to property, you might not even own the sandals on your feet. Under the manor system, your husband had control over your dowry and any property you brought into the marriage. It's like being put on a financial leash, and not the cute kind. But wait, there's a loophole. The sine manu marriage, which gained popularity in the late Republic, allows you to remain under your father's legal authority instead of your husband's. It's a trade-off. You might have a tad more financial independence, but family dynamics could get awkward during holiday dinners. And about inheritance, let's just say you better hope you're in Dad's good books. Under Roman law, sons got the lion's share, while daughters had to be content with a dowry. If you did manage to inherit something, it was usually through the benevolence of your male relatives. Now, your day-to-day life isn't all doom and gloom. Sure, managing a Roman household is like running a small business, complete with slaves, if you're wealthy enough, but there's a certain power in being the domestic CEO. You oversee everything from meal planning to the family's finances, and your ability to run a tight ship can elevate your family's social standing. Pliny, the younger, famously praised his wife in a letter for her dedication and efficiency, and if it was good enough for Pliny, it's a compliment worth striving for. But don't let the romanticized image of the virtuous Roman matron fool you. While poets like Ovid might paint you as the ideal wife with virtues as numerous as the votive offerings in a temple, the reality is more complex. Roman society expected you to be modest, obedient, and virtuous, but it also valued cunning and resourcefulness. Balancing these expectations is a high-wire act with no safety net. So, what's the takeaway here? Life as a Roman woman is a masterclass in multitasking, diplomacy, and resilience. You might not have the political power of the Senate, but within your home, you're a force to be reckoned with. It's a world full of contradictions, where your status is both revered and restricted, where your role is both vital and undervalued. You're a living paradox in a marble Colosseum, juggling the responsibilities of domestic life while trying to carve out a sliver of independence. And if that doesn't earn you a spot in history, well, they need to rewrite the history books. So, while you've perfected the art of being a domestic juggernaut in a world that's more about marble columns than gender equality, there's another arena you've got to master, the economy. And let's just say it's no ancient Roman holiday. Managing a household budget in Rome is a bit like trying to keep a toga spotless during a bacchanal, challenging to say the least. First, let's talk about the cost of living, which is as daunting as a gladiator fight. Imagine this, a modius of wheat, roughly 8. 5 kilograms might set you back about 3 sesterces. For perspective, a Roman legionary earned around 900 sesterces a year, so your daily bread isn't exactly cheap. And then there's olive oil, the liquid gold of the Mediterranean diet, essential for everything from cooking to lighting lamps. A sexterius, about half a litre, could cost up to 30 denarii, which is a small fortune when you're juggling expenses like a circus performer. Now, don't get me started on wine. If you're a fan of vino, you'll either need a very generous husband or some serious negotiation skills. Quality wine could range from as low as a few sesterces per amphora to an eye-watering sum for the finest Falernian. And don't think you can simply switch to water. Rome's aqueducts were engineering marvels, sure, but purification processes left something to be desired. Unless you fancy a case of Montezuma's Revenge, Roman style, wine or diluted vinegar was the safer bet. But here's where things get interesting. Despite these challenges, many Roman women didn't just sit around lamenting their empty purses. Oh no, some got creative. Enterprising women managed the household coffers with the skill of a seasoned accountant, stretching those sesterces like they were made of elastic. If you had the flair for it, you might even dip your toes into small-scale trade. Ever hear of the term Damina Mercatrix? That's you, the lady merchant, selling surplus goods from your estate or perhaps homemade crafts in the bustling forum. It's like Etsy, but with more toga and less Wi-Fi. And if you were really savvy, you'd leverage family connections like a pro. Is your brother-in-law a senator? Maybe you can persuade him to invest in your olive oil side hustle. Got a cousin in the military? Perhaps he can secure a steady supply of grain at a discounted rate. Networking wasn't just for Roman men. Women wielded social ties like a potter uses a kiln, crafting security and opportunity from the clay of familial bonds. Some women even broke into more formal business roles. Take Eumatia, a public priestess in Pompeii, who funded the construction of a major building in the Forum, an accomplishment as grand as the architecture itself. She used her wealth to support her community and her family's legacy, proving that with enough ambition and denarii, a woman could leave a mark as indelible as any emperor's decree. Yet, let's not get too carried away with the romantic notion of the entrepreneurial Roman woman. The road to financial independence was anything but smooth. You still had to navigate societal norms that preferred you behind a loom rather than a ledger. And the legal system, it was as supportive as a sandcastle during high tide. Any significant business venture required a male guardian's oversight, meaning your hard-earned profits might still be subject to paternal or marital approval. In this financial tightrope act, you needed more than just savvy. You needed cunning. The Roman world was a complex web of social and economic expectations, and you, my friend, were the spider, balancing household budgets, engaging in trade, and leveraging social connections required a mix of diplomacy, strategy, and a touch of audacity. Each purchase was a careful calculus, each investment a gamble. What's the takeaway here? Navigating the economic landscape of ancient Rome as a woman was like playing chess with a board that was constantly shifting. You had to be as quick as Mercury and as patient as Penelope, spinning financial threads into the tapestry of daily life. It's a testament to resilience and resourcefulness, qualities that history often overlooks in favor of more bombastic tales of emperors and conquests. So, as the sun sets over the Roman rooftops, casting long shadows that stretch like the ambitions of its people, you reflect on another day spent juggling the unpredictable demands of Roman domesticity. The economy may not have been built with women in mind, but that hasn't stopped you from carving out a niche, or a whole marble column, in the history of financial acumen. And if that doesn't inspire a toast with a glass of whatever wine you can afford, then perhaps history really does need a rewrite. And speaking of toasts, let's raise a glass, or maybe a clay cup, to the ever-intriguing health and hygiene rituals of Roman women. Spoiler, it's not all lavender baths and rose petals. If you've ever romanticized the idea of lounging in a Roman bathhouse, prepare to be splashed with a bit of reality. Those public baths, hailed as the wellness centers of antiquity, were about as hygienic as a modern-day gym locker room on a bad day. Sure, they offered a place to unwind and socialize, but they were also a breeding ground for germs that would make a germaphobe shudder. Picture this. Roman baths, like the grand baths of Caracalla, could accommodate over 500 bathers at once. That's a lot of togaless bodies sharing the same tepidarium, coldarium, and frigidarium. And while Romans did have some understanding of sanitation, there were attendants dedicated to cleaning the facilities. The concept of germ theory wasn't on anyone's radar for another millennium or so. As a result, those baths were less about cleanliness and more about an ancient version of a social club, where the water might be warmer than the conversations. Now, let's talk about beauty rituals, because in Roman times, looking good was as important as the mosaic on your villa floor. Roman women went to great lengths to meet beauty standards that were, to put it mildly, demanding. Pale skin was the ideal, so naturally, women used lead-based cosmetics to achieve that ghostly glow. That's right, lead. It was the original beauty is pain product, causing everything from skin damage to premature death. But hey, at least it gave that coveted pallor. Hair was another battleground in the beauty wars. Women in Rome often dyed their hair using everything from henna to a concoction of goat fat and beechwood ashes. Blonde hair was particularly fashionable, thanks to Rome's encounters with the fair-haired Gauls and Germans. If you were feeling especially bold and had the denarii to spare, you might even wear a wig made from the hair of captured slaves. Fashionable and ethically questionable, all in one go. But let's not forget the ancient equivalent of a spa treatment, the depilatory. Roman women preferred to be as smooth as a marble statue, which meant hair removal was a regular ritual. Methods included everything from plucking with tweezers to using harsh concoctions like a mixture of resin and pitch, essentially an early attempt at waxing. It's enough to make you appreciate today's laser technology. Moving from beauty to health, ancient Roman medical practices were a curious blend of the innovative and the downright bizarre. Life expectancy wasn't exactly something you boast about on a papyrus scroll. The average Roman woman was lucky to reach her 30, thanks to a laundry list of ailments that ranged from childbirth complications to infectious diseases. And that's if you survived infancy. Infant mortality rates were as high as 30%. Women faced unique health challenges, particularly when it came to childbirth. Without the modern miracle of antiseptics or anesthesia, giving birth was like rolling dice with the fates. Midwives, the unsung heroines of Roman medicine, played a critical role, using herbal remedies and traditional practices to assist with labor. But their tools and knowledge, though impressive for the time, were limited by the era's understanding of science. As for remedies, they were as diverse as the Roman Empire itself, drawing from regions as far-flung as Egypt and India. Common treatments included herbal concoctions, poultices, and the occasional animal-based remedy. Got a headache? Try a compress made from rose petals. Suffering from a fever? How about a draught of willow bark, which contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin? And if you're dealing with more mystical maladies, there's always the option of a ritual sacrifice to appease the gods. Nothing says, "Get well soon," quite like burning a few incense sticks in Jupiter's honor. Let's not sugarcoat it. Roman medicine was as much about superstition as it was about science. Physicians, often Greek slaves or freedmen, were a mixed bag of talent and snake oil salesmen. Galen, one of the most famous Roman doctors, made significant advances in anatomy and pharmacology, but even he was bound by the era's limited understanding of the human body. Bloodletting and purging were common practices, based on the belief in balancing the body's humors. It's a treatment plan that makes a modern-day detox look like a spa day. And yet, despite the odds stacked against them, Roman women managed to navigate this labyrinth of health and hygiene with remarkable resilience. They adapted, innovated, and leveraged the best of what their world had to offer. It's a testament to their ingenuity that they could maintain grace under such conditions. So, as the Roman sun sets and the city's noise fades into a chorus of cicadas, you reflect on the day's journey through the world of Roman health and beauty. It's a landscape as complex and contradictory as the empire itself, an empire of marble and mud, of elegance and endurance. And you, like those Roman women before you, are part of a long legacy of survival and adaptation. History might have favored emperors and generals, but it's the stories of these women that add color to the Roman tapestry. As we press on with our exploration, let's not forget the incredible depth of this ancient world. There's more to uncover in the lives of Roman women, from their roles in religion to their participation in the arts. But for now, let's leave the bathhouse and beauty rituals behind and prepare for the next chapter in this ongoing saga. After all, there's nothing quite like uncovering the layers of history, one surprising discovery at a time. And now, let's step out of the bathhouse, leaving behind the steam and suds, and stroll into the opulent world of Roman political intrigue. Here, women like Livia Drusilla and Agrippina, the younger, didn't just survive. They thrived, weaving their influence into the very fabric of Roman power, like a stealthy seamstress with a penchant for ambition. First up, Livia Drusilla, the original power player. Imagine her as the opera of ancient Rome, but with more togas and fewer book clubs. As the wife of Emperor Augustus, Livia was more than just arm candy at imperial banquets. She was a master of the political chessboard, maneuvering pieces with the precision of a seasoned general. While Augustus was busy expanding the empire, Livia was ensuring that their son, Tiberius, was poised for succession, like a hawk eyeing the juiciest rabbit. Despite the fact that Roman law considered women forever minors, lacking the legal capacity to conduct business without a male guardian, Livia wielded influence like a sword. She amassed significant wealth, which she used as a lever of power. Her estates were not just sprawling, they were strategic, providing resources and alliances that fueled her political machinations. And let's not forget her role as a patron of the arts, supporting poets and artists who, in turn, glorified the Augustan regime. Talk about a symbiotic relationship. Livia's influence was so profound that even after Augustus's death, she remained a political force, earning the title of Augusta. When Tiberius ascended to the throne, she was there, a shadowy figure in the background, pulling strings and whispering counsel. Her legacy was so indelible that subsequent emperors, including her grandson Caligula, would feel her spectral influence long after she was gone. And in a testament to her savvy, she was posthumously deified, a rarity for women, cementing her status as a divine matriarch of Rome. Now, let's shift our gaze to Agrippina the Younger, a woman who took family loyalty and turned it into an art form. Daughter of the infamous Agrippina, the elder and sister to Caligula, her life was a tapestry of political ambition and familial drama. If HBO ever decides to make a series about her, it would come with a content warning for intrigue, betrayal, and a fair share of poetic justice. Agrippina's rise to power was a masterclass in resilience. Exiled by her brother Caligula, because, well, when your brother is an unpredictable tyrant, family reunions get complicated, she clawed her way back into favor after his assassination. Her marriage to Claudius, her uncle and the new emperor, yes, you heard that right, was a strategic move that would make Machiavelli proud. As empress, she not only shared her husband's bed, but also his power, influencing state decisions and paving the way for her son Nero's eventual rule. But Agrippina wasn't just a backstage strategist. She was a cultural patron, too. She supported literary figures and public works, enhancing her image and securing her legacy. And talk about a tough crowd. She survived multiple assassination attempts, including one where she swam to safety after a sabotaged boat sunk. Move over, Barned Girls. Agrippina was the original unsinkable femme fatale. Yet, despite her cunning and fortitude, Agrippina's story is a cautionary tale about the perilous dance of power. Her relationship with Nero, once a carefully nurtured alliance, soured as he grew paranoid and power-hungry. In a tragic twist, the son she fought so hard to elevate eventually ordered her death, proving that in the Game of Thrones, family ties are as fragile as a Roman fresco. So, what's the takeaway here? The notion of passive Roman women is as outdated as a chariot in a Ferrari showroom. Figures like Livia and Agrippina reveal the complexity of female influence in Rome, a world where women, despite legal and societal shackles, found ways to wield power and shape history. They were the architects of their destinies, even if the bricks were laid in the shadows. In this world of marble columns and political machinations, women didn't just knit tunics, they knitted the very fabric of Roman society. Their stories remind us that history isn't just about the emperors and generals who made the headlines. It's about the behind-the-scenes strategists who made all the difference. As we continue this journey through ancient Rome, remember, the past is a tapestry woven with the threads of many voices, and it's the women's stories that add the richest colors. And speaking of voices, let's not forget the cultural patronage that allowed these women to amplify theirs. Roman women, from empresses to wealthy matrons, were not just passive consumers of culture, they were active creators and patrons. They sponsored public buildings, funded artistic endeavors, and hosted salons that were the intellectual epicenters of their time. Think of them as the original influencers, curating culture before hashtags were a thing. We've already seen how Livia and Agrippina leveraged their positions to support the arts. But they weren't alone. Take the case of Julia Damna, wife of Emperor Septimius Severus. A philosopher and scholar in her own right, she transformed the imperial court into a hub of intellectual discourse, attracting thinkers from across the empire. Her patronage helped preserve the works of Galen, whose medical theories would influence Western medicine for centuries. Without her, the pages of history might have been a little thinner, a little less rich. And let's not overlook the Vestal Virgins, those eternal flame keepers of Roman religion and politics. These women were more than just ceremonial figures. They wielded significant influence in the religious and civic life of Rome. As priestesses, they were granted rights that were denied to most Roman women, like owning property and voting in certain religious matters. Their role was a paradox, revered and powerful, yet bound by vows of chastity that kept them on a tight societal leash. In patronizing the arts, these women left a legacy as lasting as any marble monument. They illuminated the cultural landscape of Rome, proving that influence isn't always about holding a sword. It's about shaping the pen that writes the history. And as we explore their stories, we gain a richer understanding of the Roman world, one where women were both spectators and participants in the grand theater of history. As our journey through ancient Rome continues, we move ever closer to understanding the complex roles women played in this storied civilization. They were mothers and matrons, strategists and seductresses, patrons and priests. But above all, they were survivors, navigating a world that often sought to silence them. Their stories are a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a spirit that, even in the face of adversity, finds a way to leave a mark on the pages of history. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the lives of Roman women, let's keep our eyes open and our minds curious. There's still so much more to uncover in this ancient world of contradictions, where marble grandeur met human frailty, and who knows what surprising discoveries await us on the horizon. One thing's for sure, in the grand mosaic of history, it's the unexpected pieces that often shine the brightest. And so we arrive at the final act of our Roman saga, where myths and realities intertwine like the vines of Bacchus' favorite vineyard. It's time to unpack the romanticized image of Roman women that history has so kindly, or maybe cruelly, gifted us. Because let's face it, the Roman woman of legend is often more about marble statues and less about the gritty realities of ancient life. Let's start by dismantling the myth of the Roman matron as a passive, toga-wrapped domestic goddess. Sure, the romantic tales paint her as a virtuous, obedient wife whose only ambition was to raise noble heirs and keep a spotless household. Picture her as the ideal homemaker, wielding a distaff instead of a sword. But the reality, it was more akin to a high-stakes game of survival, where she had to navigate a labyrinth of societal expectations and legal shackles with all the cunning of a fox in a henhouse. The myth of the demure Roman wife handily ignores the complexity of her life. Women like Livia Drusilla and Agrippina, the younger, didn't just dabble in domesticity. They orchestrated political symphonies that would make modern spin doctors envious. They were power brokers in a toga-clad world, proving that influence doesn't require a seat in the Senate, just a strategic mind and a knack for making alliances as strong as the concrete in Roman aqueducts. And speaking of domesticity, let's address the myth of the Roman housewife's idyllic life. The truth is, running a Roman household was less about lounging and more about logistics. It was like managing a startup, only with more slaves and fewer stock options. Women were the CFOs of their homes, balancing budgets tighter than a gladiator's belt, and sometimes even engaging in trade to keep the coffers from echoing like the Colosseum on a slow day. The romanticized image of the Roman woman as a domestic angel conveniently glosses over the grit required to keep the family and finances afloat. Then there's the beauty myth, the notion that Roman women were effortlessly beautiful, with alabaster skin and flowing locks. Here's the reality check. Getting that effortless look was as labor-intensive as a Roman road crew. Lead-based makeup provided the fashionable pallor at the cost of health, and hair dyes ranged from henna to concoctions that would make a chemist cringe. The quest for beauty was a full-time job, with a health risk bonus thrown in for good measure. But let's not just tear down myths. Let's look at the legacy these women left behind. Their strategies for survival, balancing cunning with charm, have echoed through the ages, shaping how we perceive gender roles today. They were early architects of a kind of proto-feminism, carving out spaces of power in a world that preferred them silent and invisible. Their resilience is a testament to the enduring struggle for gender equality, reminding us that the battle for agency is as ancient as Rome itself. Reflecting on the impact of Roman women's survival strategies, we find echoes in modern debates on gender roles. The idea of women as silent partners in history is a myth ripe for debunking. Roman women, through sheer tenacity and strategic maneuvering, proved that influence isn't just wielded in the halls of power, but also in the quiet corners of domestic and social life. Their stories highlight the importance of recognizing women's contributions, often overlooked, in the grand narrative of history. And what about the myths of Roman romance? The tales often focus on love affairs as passionate as a Mediterranean sunset. Yet, the reality of Roman marriages was more akin to a business merger than a romantic escapade. Marriages were strategic alliances, with love sometimes taking a backseat to property and progeny. The myth of the grand Roman romance is charming, but it's a facade that masks the economic and social calculations that often dictated personal relationships. In unraveling these myths, we gain a clearer picture of how historical narratives are shaped, and sometimes misshaped. By understanding the true scope of Roman women's lives, we can better inform contemporary discussions on gender and society. Their stories challenge us to reconsider the dynamics of power and agency, both in the past and today. They remind us that history is not just the tale of those in power, but also of those who navigated the intricate webs of influence behind the scenes. So, as we wrap up our journey through the lives of Roman women, let's raise a metaphorical glass to their indomitable spirit. They weren't merely passive participants in the Roman epic. They were active authors of their own stories, leaving imprints as lasting as any emperor's decree. Their legacy is a mosaic of triumphs and trials, a testament to the complexity of human resilience. In the end, understanding Roman women isn't just about rewriting history. It's about enriching our understanding of the human experience. Their stories, set against the backdrop of an empire that once ruled the known world, offer valuable insights into the timeless dance of power, gender, and society. And as we close this chapter, let's carry forward the lessons of their lives, recognizing the strength and ingenuity that have long shaped the course of history. The year is 1840, and you're a pint-sized soot ninja scaling the urban jungle of London, but But don't get too excited. It's not as thrilling as it sounds. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution, the city skyline is a forest of chimneys belching smoke, and you, my friend, are the unwitting hero tasked with keeping them clean. It's not glamorous, and forget about any Hollywood-style adventures. Instead, you're armed with a brush and a bag, ready to dive into the gritty underbelly of urban life. To be blunt, your job sucks, literally and figuratively. You're one of the countless children, yes, children, employed to navigate these sooty labyrinths. Why kids? Well, it turns out that a 6-year-old's size is perfect for squeezing through the narrow flues of Victorian chimneys. Forget about child labor laws. We're talking about a time when the idea of safety regulations was as far-fetched as a unicorn in Hyde Park. Your workday starts early, way before the crack of dawn, and your payment, a few pennies per chimney if you're lucky. Meanwhile, your master, the adult who trains you, pockets the larger share. This Dickensian nightmare is real life, with the average sweep earning between a measly 10 to 20 shillings a week. That's barely enough to keep you fed, let alone clothed. The economic incentives driving this grim profession are like a twisted game of supply and demand. As the Industrial Revolution cranked up its engines, the demand for coal skyrocketed, and so did the number of chimneys. After all, who doesn't love a roaring fire in the hearth, especially when it's literally the only way to heat your home? But a blocked chimney was a death trap, risking not just a fire hazard, but the ominous threat of carbon monoxide poisoning. So, you and your fellow chimney sweeps became indispensable, if not highly regarded, members of society. The conditions, let's just say OSHA would have a field day. You're wedged into claustrophobic spaces, sometimes just 9 inches wide, with nothing but a cap to protect your noggin from the bricks and mortar. And if you think soot is just a harmless byproduct, think again. It's a carcinogenic cocktail that coats your skin and fills your lungs with every climb. By the age of 10, you're likely to be debilitated by chimney sweeps carcinoma, a nasty skin cancer. Not exactly the career path you dreamed of. But how did we get here? The Industrial Revolution was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought technological advancements and economic growth. On the other, it created an urban sprawl that demanded a constant army of chimney sweeps. Cities like London, Manchester, and Birmingham mushroomed in size, their smokestacks rising like a grimy monument to progress. With this growth came a dark side, a labor market that was more about survival than success. And let's talk about the social context, because it wasn't just economics that kept kids like you in this grueling job. The romanticized notion of the happy-go-lucky sweep was as fictional as a fairy tale. Victorian society loved its class system, and you, at the bottom rung, were expected to know your place. You weren't just battling soot. You were up against a social structure that saw you as expendable. The idea of elevating your status was about as realistic as a chimney that cleans itself. Now, before you think this is just another sob story, let's not forget the public's peculiar fascination with your plight. The image of the chimney sweep became a staple in art and literature. Charles Dickens, anyone. Casting a kind of morbid curiosity over the whole profession. It was the grim reality wrapped in a compelling narrative, the kind that makes people uncomfortable yet unable to look away. But the truth, it's a gritty existence, far from the sanitized tales of plucky, soot-covered lads. As you crawl through these dark, confining spaces, you might dream of a day when you're free from the soot, when your biggest challenge isn't just surviving the next chimney, but finding a better life. Because, really, you wouldn't want to trade this life for something, anything, better. But until then, you're stuck in this sooty underworld, earning pennies and carrying the weight of the Industrial Revolution on your small, soot-stained shoulders. And that, my friend, is why being a 19th century chimney sweep is the very definition of a dirty job. But enough about the grime and grind of it all. Let's talk about the bizarrely enduring myth of the cheerful chimney sweep. Thanks to Victorian-era literature and art, people got this wild idea that these soot-covered kids were somehow plucky little sprites frolicking through life with a song in their hearts. Blame it on the romanticized narratives woven by authors like Charles Dickens, who spun tales of hardship with a side of sentimental redemption, or the paintings that depicted young sweeps with rosy cheeks and mischievous grins. The reality, more like a grim game of survival with a soundtrack of wheezing coughs and the rattle of coins in an empty pocket. In truth, the life of a chimney sweep was anything but a merry jaunt. Victorian London was a place where the concept of child labour laws was as fantastical as a unicorn galloping through Trafalgar Square. The truth is, young sweeps were more likely to face exploitation and abuse than any sort of upliftment. You see, children were easy prey in a society that valued cheap labour over child welfare. The lack of legislation meant that kids as young as 4 were thrust into this back-breaking work, their small frames perfect for navigating the cramped, soot-choked flues that adults couldn't fit through. If you were a chimney sweep, you were essentially trapped in a Dickensian horror show, with your only way out being the slim chance of growing too big for the job. Enter Lord Shaftesbury, the Victorian noble who became something of a shining knight in the battle against child labour. Anthony Ashley Cooper, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, wasn't content to let children languish in the shadows of industry. He spearheaded reform efforts in the 1830s and 1840, launching a series of legislative pushes to curb the use of child labour. His campaigns were instrumental in the passing of the Chimney Sweepers Act of 1840, which aimed to regulate the trade and set a minimum age of 10 for apprentices. Yet, in a world where enforcement was about as common as a sunny day in a London fog, this act was more of a suggestion than a mandate. Shaftesbury's efforts were part of a slow, agonizing crawl toward progress, hindered by a society steeped in tradition and economic self-interest. The image of the chimney sweep as a charming, carefree character persisted, fueled by an artistic class that found something perversely picturesque in the soot-streaked faces of these child labourers. The romantic myth endured, even as the harsh reality of their plight was undeniable. It was a time when the public was both captivated by and willfully ignorant of the suffering hidden beneath the veneer of Victorian progress. So why did this myth endure? Perhaps it was comforting to believe in a world where even the most downtrodden could find joy in their struggles. Or maybe it was easier to look away from the grim realities of child labour when wrapped in the guise of an inspiring narrative. It's not too different from today, really. People love a good underdog story, even if it's more fiction than fact. But the truth, as always, is grittier and less forgiving. As public awareness slowly grew, thanks in part to reformers like Shaftesbury and the occasional journalistic exposé, the wheels of change began to turn. However, it was more of a rusty creak than a swift pivot. The 1864 Chimney Sweepers Regulation Act finally put the nail in the coffin of child labour in the industry, requiring sweeps to register with the police and imposing fines on those who employed children. Yet, enforcement was still a far cry from what we consider adequate today. It took decades for the practice to truly die out, as the social and economic fabric of Britain gradually shifted toward greater protections for children and workers. In the meantime, the romanticized image of the chimney sweep continued to loom large in the public consciousness, a testament to the power of narrative over reality. It was a comforting illusion, but one that obscured the suffering of countless young lives. Even as the practice waned, the legend of the cheerful sweep lived on, immortalized in song and story, a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. But let's not forget the harsh truths behind the myth, a reminder that progress often comes at a cost. As we leave behind the soot and sorrow of the 19th century chimney sweep, remember that history's heroes and villains aren't always who they seem. And as we continue to unravel this tale, keep an eye out for the unexpected turns and hidden stories lurking in the shadows of the past. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that reality is often stranger and grimmer than fiction. And speaking of unexpected turns, let's dive into the 1860, when the winds of change began to blow through the soot-filled air of Britain's urban centres. Enter the mechanical chimney sweep, contraption that was as revolutionary as it was unassuming, a bit like the Roomba of its day, if you will. This device promised to banish the need for child labourers scrambling up chimneys like reluctant squirrels. But before you pop the champagne, let's explore why this mechanical marvel didn't immediately sweep the nation off its feet. Picture it, a long brush, often made of steel, attached to rods that could be extended and twisted from the safety of the ground. Sounds simple, right? Yet, like all great inventions, its brilliance lay in its ability to address a dire need with a straightforward solution. Suddenly, those 9-inch-wide chimneys didn't require a child's nimble form to be scrubbed clean. The machine could do the job, minus the risk of childhood cancer, asphyxiation, or getting stuck halfway up a chimney like a Dickensian version of Winnie the Pooh. But of course, nothing in Victorian society was ever that easy. You see, there were vested interests at play, namely, the master chimney sweeps and their guilds, who had a significant stake in maintaining the status quo. Imagine the outcry from these guilds, akin to today's taxi drivers railing against ride-sharing apps. The masters saw these mechanical sweepers as an affront to their authority and a direct threat to their bottom line. They'd invested in a system that relied on cheap child labor. Why would they abandon it for an unproven gadget? Economics, as always, played a leading role. The initial cost of purchasing a mechanical sweeper wasn't trivial, especially for small-time operators who were already scraping by. And while the machine promised long-term savings, many sweeps were living day-to-day, unable to invest in the future. It's the classic tale of penny wise, pound foolish, a theme that never seems to go out of style. And let's not forget the human element, the stubborn resistance to change that makes us cling to the familiar like a favorite old coat, even when it's riddled with holes and smells like soot. While some progressive sweep masters saw the benefits of mechanization, many were entrenched in their ways, convinced that a machine could never replace the skill and intuition of a seasoned young climber. It's a bit like insisting vinyl sounds better than digital. There's some truth to it, but nostalgia does the heavy lifting. On the legislative front, things weren't exactly speeding along. The 1864 Chimney Sweepers Regulation Act was a step in the right direction, but it was more of a shuffle than a sprint. Enforcement was lax, and the penalties for non-compliance were laughably light. Picture a slap on the wrist, but with a feather duster instead of a firm hand. The law was more advisory than mandatory, allowing many to circumvent it with little fear of repercussion. It was a time when red tape was more of a suggestion than a barrier. Meanwhile, the winds of social change were blowing, albeit gently. The mid to late 19th century saw a rising tide of reformist sentiment with increasing awareness of the plight of child laborers. Philanthropists, journalists, and reformers pushed the narrative, shining a light on the grim realities behind the soot-streaked smiles. Their efforts were part of a broader movement that sought to redefine the very fabric of society, challenging the Victorian ethos that had long prioritized economic gain over human welfare. In this context, the mechanical sweeper wasn't just a tool. It was emblematic of a larger societal shift. It symbolized the growing recognition that progress didn't have to come at the expense of the most vulnerable. But the transition from child labor to mechanical efficiency was far from seamless. It was a gradual shift, marked by fits and starts, with many setbacks along the way. Take, for instance, the story of Joseph Glass, a key figure in the mechanization movement. He patented a version of the mechanical brush in 1828, but it took decades for his invention to gain traction. Why? Because technological innovation is often at odds with human inertia. People didn't just buy the machine. They had to buy into the idea that a better way was possible, a concept that's as relevant today as it was then. So, while the introduction of the mechanical sweeper marked a significant turning point, it was not the panacea many hoped it would be. It took time for the device to become widespread, hindered by economic barriers, political inertia, and social resistance. Yet, it was a harbinger of change, a sign that the days of child chimney sweeps were numbered, even if those numbers were painfully slow to dwindle. As we look back at this period, it's clear that the machines weren't just replacing child labor. They were challenging an entire system that had long exploited the most defenseless members of society. It was the dawn of a new age, one where technology began to serve humanity rather than the other way around. And while the romantic myth of the cheerful chimney sweep lingered on, the reality was finally starting to catch up. But don't go thinking this was the end of the story. The journey from soot-covered servitude to mechanized efficiency was far from over. The next chapters in this tale will reveal even more twists and turns as society grappled with the complex interplay of technology, tradition, and the timeless quest for progress. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of history, where every turn offers new insights into the human condition and the relentless march toward a better future. So, we've got mechanical sweepers slowly inching their way into the narrative, and let's be honest, it's about time. But as we pivot from soot-stained children to the promise of technology, let's not forget the real humans left in the wake of those chimneys. That's right, we're talking about the long-term survivors of the chimney sweep trade, those who made it past the age of 10, though not without some serious scars, both literal and metaphorical. First up, let's chat about chimney sweep's carcinoma. It sounds like a character from a Dickens novel, but it's far less charming. This nasty skin cancer primarily affected the scrotum, which, yes, is as horrific as it sounds. The culprit, soot. Not just any soot, but the kind that latches onto skin like a clingy X, wreaking havoc over time. The first recorded case was in 1775, diagnosed by Sir Percival Part, a surgeon who probably never imagined his name would become synonymous with a particularly grim occupational hazard. By the 19th century, this cancer was a well-known, if not grimly accepted, consequence of a life spent in chimneys. And it's not just cancer. Respiratory issues were a given, with sweeps hacking up soot-filled lungs like they were auditioning for a Victorian horror story. Chronic coughs, asthma, and tuberculosis were all part of the package. You could say their health prospects were about as bright as a London fog. But even if you dodged the major health bullets, you weren't exactly rolling in opportunities. The social ladder might as well have been a greasy pole for former sweeps. Climbing it, a pipe dream. The stigma of being a former sweep clung to you as tenaciously as the soot did. You were seen as uneducated, dirty, and fit for little else. The idea of upward mobility was about as believable as a unicorn waltzing down Oxford Street. Reform efforts, sure, they were there, but let's be real. Change moved at a glacial pace in the 19th century. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1834 and its successors were more about appearances than actual enforcement. The noblemen in Parliament might have patted themselves on the back for passing these laws, but on the streets, where the soot settled, real change was as elusive as a day without rain in London. This wasn't just about chimney sweeps. The struggles they faced were a microcosm of the broader class issues of the time. The Victorian era loved its class distinctions, and moving up the social hierarchy was often more about who you knew than what you did. The labouring classes were expected to know their place, and if that place happened to involve a chimney, well, tough luck. The Industrial Revolution might have been a time of great innovation, but it was also an era when social mobility was as constrained as a Victorian corset. But let's not pretend the public was entirely blind to the plight of these young sweeps. The era was rife with reformist zeal, and while legislative change lagged, public sentiment was slowly shifting. The gritty realities faced by chimney sweeps became fodder for journalists and reformers eager to shine a light on the dark corners of industrial society. They were the muckrakers of their day, wielding their pens like swords and hoping to jab at the conscience of the nation. Yet, despite the growing awareness, the romanticized image of the cheerful chimney sweep persisted. It's like society had a split personality, simultaneously horrified by the reality and enchanted by the myth. The arts played a significant role in this. Painters and writers kept the trope alive, portraying sweeps as endearing rascals who somehow found joy amid adversity. It was a narrative that suited the Victorian palate, offering a spoonful of sentiment to make the grim realities more palatable. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, it's a reminder that progress is a slow dance, not a quick sprint. For every step forward, there are countless stumbles and setbacks. The story of the chimney sweeps is one of resilience against the odds, a testament to human endurance in the face of systemic inequality. And while their tale is one of hardship, it's also a crucial chapter in the larger story of labor rights and social reform. As we continue to unravel the narrative of the 19th century chimney sweep, remember this: the real stories are often messier than the myths, but they're also richer and more instructive. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the fabric of history, where every soot-streaked page offers new insights into the human condition and our unending quest for a fairer world. And who knows, perhaps we'll uncover more unexpected twists as we move forward, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never quite as tidy as we'd like it to be. As the soot settles on our tale of chimney sweeps, let's take a moment to marvel at the peculiar legacy they've left behind. These soot-covered kids, once the grim poster children of industrial exploitation, have somehow morphed into whimsical icons of resilience. It's a bit like if the tragic story of Titanic became all about the romanticized glitz of Jack and Rose. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a bit of cinematic escapism? But while we're swooning over the plucky chimney sweep, it's crucial to remember the grim realities they faced, just as we wouldn't want to forget the iceberg lurking beneath Titanic's tail. First, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the chimney sweep, in the room, the romantic narrative. Who can forget the cheeky charm of Dick Van Dyke's Bert in Mary Poppins? His joyful dance on the rooftops of London, complete with catchy tunes, and a spring in his soot-covered step, painted a picture far removed from the harsh life of a Victorian sweep. In reality, Bert would have been hacking up soot, not harmonizing with it. This romanticization might make for great entertainment, but it glosses over the gritty truth of child labor and systemic exploitation. It's a bit like looking at a war movie and only focusing on the heroics, ignoring the chaos and destruction. And it's not just movies. Literature, too, has played its part in shaping this narrative. Charles Dickens, the granddaddy of Victorian social commentary, often highlighted the plight of the poor, chimney sweeps included, yet even he couldn't resist adding a dash of sentimentality. The social reformer in him wanted to expose the injustices, but the novelist knew a heartstring-tugging tale sold books. It's a classic case of art reflecting reality and then adding a soft focus lens. But here's the kicker. While these narratives have kept the memory of chimney sweeps alive, they've often done so at the expense of accuracy. The truth was a lot less picturesque. These kids weren't dancing their way into our hearts. They were crawling through claustrophobic spaces, risking life and limb for a few shillings. By the age of 10, many were already marked by the telltale signs of their trade: permanent respiratory damage, disfiguring scars, and a future as bleak as a foggy London afternoon. So why does this romanticized image persist? Perhaps it's because we love a good underdog story. The idea that even the most downtrodden can find joy amidst adversity is comforting. It's a narrative that resonates across cultures and eras, from Cinderella to Rocky Balboa. But focusing solely on this romantic angle can be dangerously misleading, obscuring the urgent need for reform and the harsh realities faced by those at the bottom rung of society. Now, let's talk about the cultural legacy. The chimney sweep has become a symbol of bygone innocence, a relic of a time when life was supposedly simpler, though in reality it was anything but. The Industrial Revolution, for all its technological marvels, was a period rife with social upheaval, inequality, and exploitation. The cheerful chimney sweep is a nostalgic shorthand for a past that's easier to romanticize than to reckon with. Yet, amidst this nostalgia, there's a vital lesson to be learned. The plight of chimney sweeps was instrumental in galvanizing early labor reform movements. The outcry against the exploitation of child labor became a rallying point for broader social change. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1834 and its successors, while initially toothless, were early steps toward recognizing the need for worker protections, an idea that would eventually lead to the labor rights we often take for granted today. It's crucial to remember these historical realities as we navigate our own modern landscape. Just as the chimney sweep's struggles laid the groundwork for labor reform, today's battles against exploitation and inequality continue to shape our society. The romanticized narrative may offer a comforting illusion, but the real story, gritty, raw, and complex, serves as a powerful reminder of the progress made and the work still to be done. As we wrap up this sooty saga, let's keep in mind that the past is a rich tapestry of contradictions, romance and reality, progress and pain, heroism and hardship. The chimney sweep's journey from soot-covered child laborer to cultural icon is a testament to both the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of myth. But it's also a stark reminder of the need to look beyond the myth and confront the truths that have shaped our world. So, as you drift off to sleep with these new nuggets of knowledge, ponder this. History is not just about the stories we tell, but about the lessons we learn. The chimney sweeps of the 19th century might be long gone, but their legacy, and the fight for fairness they symbolize, remains as relevant as ever. And who knows, perhaps the next time you see a smoke-streaked skyline or hear a jaunty tune, you'll remember the real lives behind the legend. Because in the end, understanding the past is not just about knowing where we came from. but about charting a more just and equitable future. The sun's barely peeking over the horizon, and yet your Viking day has already kicked off with the kind of vigor that would put a triple shot of espresso to shame. Out here in your rugged Scandinavian village, where the air is crisp and the fjords are as cold as your mother-in-law's stare, the sea is more than just a picturesque backdrop. It's your grocery store, your currency exchange, and your life insurance policy all rolled into one. The harsh reality of Viking life is that if you don't fish, you might as well start making friends with the crows, because you'll soon be their next meal. Fishing, in this age, isn't just a leisurely pastime with a cooler of beer on a Saturday afternoon. It's a gritty, back-breaking affair that keeps your family fed and your village thriving. Cod and herring are the stars of this salty show. Cod, with its meaty flakes, is practically the beef of the sea, and herring, well, it's the small fry that keeps things interesting. You see, Scandinavia isn't exactly bursting with lush farmlands. A bit of barley here, a patch of turnips there, but mostly it's rocks and cold. That's why fish isn't just a dietary option. It's the main course, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now, let's talk tools of the trade. Forget your fancy carbon fiber rods and high-tech reels. You're working with hooks that a modern angler would probably mistake for a museum piece. Bone and iron are the materials of choice, and crafting these is as much an art as it is a necessity. You might find yourself squatting by the hearth, whittling down bones into crude hooks or hammering iron into shape, all the while praying to Odin that they hold when that monster cod takes the bait. And let's not forget the nets, painstakingly knotted together with fibers from local plants or animal sinews. It's a labor-intensive process, but when it's a matter of survival, you do what needs to be done. But why does any of this matter, you might ask? Why should we care about how Vikings caught their fish 1,000 years ago? Well, the economic backbone of your village depends on it. Fish aren't just for feasting, they're for trading. Salted and dried, these fish are like gold bars that you can eat. They're sent off to trade with other communities, bringing back goods and resources you can't produce locally. This isn't just survival, it's commerce. And in a world where the sea is both your highway and your pantry, being a good fisherman means being a good provider. Despite the romantic image of Vikings as fierce warriors, wielding axes and plundering distant shores, most of your time is spent right here, wrestling with the elements and harnessing the sea's bounty. Sure, there's a certain allure to the idea of a Viking raider, but the reality is, you better be just as skilled with a net as you are with a sword, because when the longships are docked and the raiding season is over, it's the fish that keep you going through the frigid winters. But don't get too swept up in the romance of it all. The sea isn't just a benevolent provider. It's a fickle, sometimes cruel mistress. There are days when you'll cast your net and bring up nothing but weeds and disappointment. Days when the storms roll in faster than a longship, and you're left battling waves that seem to have a personal vendetta against you. And yet, you push on, because in this world, resilience isn't just a trait, it's a way of life. So, as you stand on the edge of the fjord, your breath visible in the crisp morning air, take a moment to appreciate the symbiotic relationship you have with the sea. It's not just about catching fish. It's about sustaining a community, building an economy, and in a very real sense, surviving against the odds. And remember, while the legends of Viking warriors might fill the sagas, it's the quiet, relentless determination of the Viking fisherman that fills the belly. Now, let's pivot from the chilly romance of the Viking fisherman to the real stars of our salty saga, the boats. Forget the longships for a moment, those sleek raiders of the sea with their dragon heads and warrior crews. We're talking Nars here, the workhorses of Viking nautical life. These sturdy vessels were the pickup trucks of the Viking age, robust, reliable, and built to haul everything from fish to livestock to your grandma's prized loom. Picture a ship about 50 feet long and 15 feet wide, designed not for speed, but for endurance and capacity. A Nar could carry up to 24 tons of goods, making it the medieval equivalent of a cargo freighter. These boats were the unsung heroes of the Viking economy. Sure, they didn't have the glamorous life of a raiding longship, but they were the backbone of Viking trade and exploration. Constructed from oak, pine, or whatever sturdy timber the forest could spare, these ships were meticulously crafted with overlapping planks, what the experts call clinker-built. This design wasn't just for show. It was a masterclass in balancing flexibility and strength. The overlapping planks allowed the hull to flex in rough seas, absorbing energy from the waves instead of snapping like a twig in a store. It's the kind of design innovation that makes you appreciate the Vikings' engineering chops. Now, if you think 100 miles offshore sounds like a leisurely Sunday cruise, think again. It's hard to overstate the nerve it took to set sail into the North Atlantic, where weather forecasts were about as reliable as a wooden shield against a battle axe. But the Vikings weren't just fishing in these waters. They were trading and exploring. These were the highways of their world, leading not only to new fishing grounds, but also to far-flung markets. The Nars transported salted fish, wool, and amber across the North Sea, transforming local economies and connecting distant communities. They braved the notorious waters between Norway, Iceland, and Greenland, not for the thrill, but for opportunity and survival. And let's not forget the human element here. A Nar wasn't just a floating supermarket. It was a floating community. With a crew of about a dozen hardy souls, you'd form a tight-knit group, bonded by shared hardships and the ever-present threat of a rogue wave. You might think of it as an early version of a reality TV show, except instead of competing for a rose, you're competing to stay alive. Every journey was a high-stakes gamble, the outcome depending as much on the crew's skill and endurance as on the whims of the sea. The Nars' ability to sail long distances also meant Vikings were among the early pioneers of what we might call globalization. Their trade networks stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the shores of North America, a staggering reach for the time. This wasn't just about economic gain, it was about cultural exchange. The Vikings weren't the isolated barbarians history sometimes paints them as. They were connectors of worlds, carrying stories, ideas, and technologies along with their cargo. But before you romanticize this into a peaceful picture of cross-cultural harmony, let's set the record straight. This was a tough, competitive business. Navigating through storms was the easy part. Navigating through the cutthroat world of medieval trade was another challenge altogether. Market prices could swing like a berserker's axe, and deals were often as precarious as a Nar in a squall. In this world, trade was as much about shrewd negotiation as it was about skillful sailing. As we chart this course through Viking maritime history, remember that while their raids stole the headlines, it was the steady, relentless grind of trade and exploration that truly defined their era. The Nar might not have the panache of a dragon-headed longship, but it was the vessel that carried the Vikings' legacy across oceans. And as the salty spray hits your face, and the horizon stretches endlessly ahead, you realize that in this world, the real adventure isn't in the destination, it's in the journey. Stay tuned, because the sea's tales are far from over. Speaking of journeys, let's dive deeper into the social tapestry of Viking fishing communities. If you thought being a Viking was all about swinging swords and raiding, hold onto your horned helmet. Oops, myth alert. They didn't actually wear those. But back to the story. In reality, these communities were buzzing with activity and had a division of labor that would make any modern-day HR manager nod approvingly. Picture the scene. Viking men heading out to sea, their eyes set on the horizon, not just because they are looking for fish, but because the sea was their office, their battleground, and their means to a better life. Out here, it's not just about catching fish. It's about bringing home the bacon, or should I say, the card. These men are the maritime hunters, the ones braving the cold, treacherous waters to ensure their families don't just survive, but thrive. Meanwhile, back on land, Viking women were the unsung heroes of this salty saga. While the men were out playing Viking deadliest catch, the women were the masters of processing the bounty. They were the ones gutting, salting, and smoking the fish, turning raw catch into a durable, tradable commodity. In a way, they were the medieval version of a food processing plant, minus the hairnets and assembly lines. This wasn't just domestic drudgery, it was a vital economic role. The labor was intense, but it was also empowering in a society where every member had a part to play. In these communities, fish wasn't just a meal, it was a currency. Salted fish, particularly cod and herring, was as good as gold. It's a bit like being able to swap your sandwich for a smartphone at lunch. And this wasn't just a local affair. Oh no, the economic impact of Viking fish trading was as vast as the oceans they sailed. We're talking networks that stretched all the way to the Byzantine Empire. Imagine your fish sandwich making its way from a Norwegian fjord to the hustle and bustle of Constantinople. That's some serious mileage. The Vikings may have been known for their raiding, but when it came to trade, they were nothing short of savvy. their salted fish ended up in markets across Europe, traded for everything from silver to silk. It's like the Vikings were running a medieval Costco, where the currency was dried fish rather than a credit card. And let's not underestimate the logistical brilliance behind this. Transporting fish over such vast distances required more than just a sturdy ship. It required a mind for trade that was as sharp as any Viking axe. Now, let's not gloss over the fact that fish trading wasn't all smooth sailing. The market was as unpredictable as a Norse saga. Prices could swing wildly, and a poor catch season could spell disaster. It was a high-stakes game, with each trade voyage a gamble against the elements and the economy. Yet this was the lifeblood of Viking society, fueling their expansion and connecting them to a broader world. They weren't just fierce warriors. They were shrewd entrepreneurs, leveraging their maritime prowess to build an economic network that would make any modern trade mogul envious. And what about the social dynamics within these communities? Well, the division of labor wasn't just about who did what. It was a reflection of the values and survival strategies of the time. Men and women operated within their defined roles, but these roles were complementary, interdependent. It was a partnership that ensured the survival and prosperity of the whole community. In a world where every day was a battle against nature, this cohesion was crucial. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life in a Viking fishing community was tough. The work was hard, the stakes were high, and the weather was often as unforgiving as a jarl with a grudge. Yet, despite the hardships, these communities thrived, demonstrating a resilience that is nothing short of remarkable. They adapted to their environment, leveraging the resources available to them in ways that were both innovative and practical. In the end, the story of Viking fishing communities is one of collaboration and commerce, of harnessing the sea not just for survival, but for prosperity. It's a tale of grit and determination, where the sea's bounty was transformed into the currency of connection, linking the icy waters of Scandinavia to the vibrant markets of the Mediterranean. So next time you hear the word Viking, don't just think of warriors and longships. Think of the fishermen and women who turned the sea's bounty into economic gold, weaving a web of trade that spanned continents. And remember, the real Viking legacy isn't just carved in stone or sung in sagas. It's written in the salty spray of the sea and the relentless drive to turn the tides in their favor. But hold on to your oars, because this voyage through Viking history is far from over. There's more to explore, from the everyday lives of these seafaring communities to the broader cultural exchanges they sparked. So keep your sea legs steady and your curiosity keen as we sail deeper into the heart of the Viking Age. Now, before you start thinking these Vikings were living the dream with their fish-to-freedom pipeline, let's take a reality check. Hollywood might have you believe that every Viking was a fearless adventurer with a six-pack and a death wish. But the truth is not all roaring fires and ale-soaked feasts. You see, the sea was as much a nemesis as an ally. Sure, there were days when the waters were as smooth as a bard's tale, but more often than not, it was a tempestuous beast, throwing you around like a rag doll in a washing machine. Let's talk weather, because Mother Nature in the North Atlantic plays by her own rules. Picture this. You're out there in your trusty gnar, just trying to make a living, and suddenly the sky decides to drop a curtain of ice-cold rain that feels more like 1,000 tiny daggers. The wind. It's howling like a banshee, threatening to tip your boat and give you an unscheduled swimming lesson. And those romanticized Viking ship sails, they're more like giant wind catchers that can flip your vessel faster than you can shout, Valhalla. Now, while we're on the subject of survival, let's not forget about one of the less glamorous aspects of Viking fishing, food preservation. Imagine landing a boat full of cod, only to realize that if you don't salt it like a popcorn addict in a movie theater, it'll rot faster than yesterday's leftovers. Salt was the gold standard of preservation, and it wasn't exactly falling from the sky. It was a precious commodity, traded over long distances, sometimes worth its weight in, well, fish. Without it, your catch would turn into a pungent mess quicker than a fishmonger's floor at closing time. This brings us to one of the biggest myths about Viking life, the idea that they were always these rugged, fearless warriors, impervious to fear or fatigue. Reality check. Being a Viking was often about enduring the mundane and the monotonous, braving not just the seas, but the sheer tedium of tasks like gutting and salting fish day in and day out. It was a life of hard labor, with calloused hands and backs that ached from endless hours at sea or hunched over workbenches. And speaking of myths, let's address the biggest one of all, the horned helmets. I hate to break it to you, but those iconic headpieces are more fantasy than fact. They're as likely to have been worn by Vikings as a tuxedo at a mud wrestling contest. The stereotype likely stems from 19th century opera costumes, not archaeological evidence. In reality, Viking helmets were practical, made of iron or leather, and designed for battle, not for scaring the bejesus out of enemies with decorative horns. But why do these myths persist? It's simple. They're catchy, they're cinematic, and they fit neatly into our love for larger-than-life legends. The truth is, the real Viking life was gritty and grounded, marked by a constant struggle against the elements and the relentless pursuit of making a living from what the sea could provide. Of course, there's an appeal to the idea of a Viking as a fearless sailor, braving uncharted waters with nothing but a trusty ship and a pocketful of dreams. It's the stuff of epic tales. But let's not forget that behind every legendary voyage was a well-oiled machine of labor, trade, and sheer human endurance. The Vikings were not just marauders, were masters of the sea, and their legacy is one of resilience and resourcefulness. As we continue our journey through the Viking Age, keep in mind that the reality of their world was both harsher and more fascinating than any saga could capture. Their lives were a blend of romance and reality, legend and labor, and it's in this mix that we find the true spirit of the Viking era. So, let's sail on, with eyes wide open to both the myths and the truths of these remarkable seafarers. The story of the Vikings is far from over, and there's much more to discover on the horizon. So, as we ride the waves of Viking history, let's fast forward to see how these ancient sea dogs have left their mark on modern Scandinavia. You might think the days of bone hooks and knars are long gone, but hold onto your fishing nets. Viking influences are still swimming strong in today's Nordic waters. First up, let's talk about the legacy in the daily bread and butter of life, fishing. In Norway, Iceland, and Denmark, fishing remains a staple, contributing significantly to the economy. Take Norway, for instance. As of 2022, it exported seafood worth approximately 120 billion NOK, that's Norwegian krone, not monopoly money. Cod, the venerable Viking favorite, still reigns supreme. It's like the Tom Hanks of fish, reliable, versatile, and always in demand. But how did we get from bone hooks to billion-kroner industries? Innovation, my friend, is the name of the game. The Vikings set a precedent with their resourcefulness, turning the North Atlantic from a watery wilderness into a thriving trade network. Fast forward a millennium, and you find their descendants wielding sonar technology instead of sinew nets, trawlers instead of knars. We've moved from the brute strength of hauling nets to the finesse of sustainable practices, all while keeping an eye on the fish stock sustainability charts like they're the latest stock market trends. Now, if you're thinking, surely we've strayed far from the Viking ethos. Think again. The Scandinavian knack for innovation is as robust as a Viking longship. Take Iceland, where geothermal energy heats the waters of fish farms, reducing environmental impact. If that's not eco-warrior ingenuity, I don't know what is. The spirit of sustainability isn't new, it's just evolved. The Vikings understood the sea was a partner, not a resource to be plundered into oblivion. That ethos continues today, with stringent fishing quotas and conservation efforts ensuring that the sea's bounty remains abundant for future generations. But let's not only look at the practical. What about the cultural currents left behind by those salty sea voyages? Well, the Viking spirit of exploration and trade has seeped into the Scandinavian psyche like salt into cured herring. The openness to new ideas and cultures, once facilitated by trade routes reaching as far as Byzantium, has morphed into a contemporary ethos of inclusivity and global awareness. Ever wonder why Scandinavian countries consistently top happiness and equality indexes? Part of it could be their centuries-old tradition of looking outward while caring for their own. And while we're busting myths, remember the image of Vikings as brutish looters? Well, it's time to flip the script. Turns out, they were also meticulous record keepers, carving runestones to commemorate their trading exploits. This love for storytelling and legacy has trickled down through the ages. Today, Scandinavia boasts some of the world's best-preserved historical records and museums, celebrating not just the warriors but the fishers, farmers, and traders who built the backbone of their society. Here's a nugget to chew on. The next time you enjoy a piece of gravlax or some pickled herring, you're partaking in a tradition that sailed through the centuries. Scandinavian cuisine, often hailed for its simplicity and connection to nature, is a direct descendant of those Viking kitchens. 1,000 years later, the smoky, salty flavors still tell a story of survival, resilience, and community. Now, what life lessons can we glean from these sea-savvy ancients? For one, adaptability is key. Whether it was shifting from raiding to trading or from bone hooks to sonar, the Vikings never shied away from change. In a world where unpredictability is the only constant, that's a lesson worth anchoring into our own lives. Secondly, the Vikings remind us that strength lies not just in conquest, but in community. Their society thrived because of its interconnectedness, a balance of roles where everyone, from the fisherman to the trader to the craftsperson, played a part. Modern Scandinavia's social systems, with their emphasis on equality and cooperation, echo these ancient practices. And finally, let's talk about resilience. The Viking Age wasn't a time of comfort and ease. It was an era of harsh climates and harsher realities. Yet, through it all, they persisted, turning adversity into opportunity. In an age of instant gratification, their enduring spirit offers a poignant reminder. Real success isn't built on fleeting fame, but on steadfast effort and perseverance. So, as we wrap up this Viking voyage, let's appreciate not just the swords and sails, but the quiet, enduring legacy of the fishermen. They may not have made it into the sagas with dragon-headed longships, but their contributions continue to ripple through time, shaping economies, cultures, and identities across Scandinavia. And as the tides of history ebb and flow, we might just find that the Vikings' greatest legacy isn't in their conquests, but in their connection to the sea and each other. Remember, the sea's tales are far from over. Whether it's through a new fishing technique or a cultural renaissance, the echoes of the Viking Age continue to resonate. So the next time you see a storm on the horizon, think like a Viking. Brace yourself, adjust your sails, and keep your eyes on the far-off shore. After all, the real adventure isn't just in the destination, it's in the journey.